Section 11, Book the 11th. Argument. Agamemnon distinguishes himself, but being wounded, retires from the field. Diomede is wounded by Paris, Ulysses by Socus. Ajax and Menelaus then go to the relief of Ajax, and Eurypylus, who had joined them, is shot in the thigh by Paris, who also wounds Machaon. Nestor conveys Machaon from the field. Achilles sends Patroclus to the tent of Nestor, who exhorts Patroclus to engage in battle, assuming the armour of Achilles. But Aurora was rising from her couch, from beside glorious Tithonus, that she might bear light to immortals and to mortals, when Jove sent forth fell discord to the swift ships of the Greeks, bearing in her hands the portent of war. And she stood upon the huge black ship of Ulysses, which was in the centre, to shout to both sides, as well to the tents of Telamonian Ajax as to those of Achilles, who had both drawn up their equal ships at the very extremities, relying on their valour and strength of hands. There standing, the goddess shouted both loudly and terribly in Orthian strain to the Greeks, and implanted mighty strength in the heart of each to war and fight incessantly. And immediately war became more sweet to them than to return to the hollow ships to their dear fatherland. Then the son of Atreus shouted aloud, and ordered the Greeks to be girded, and arrayed himself, putting on his shining armour. First he put on his legs his beautiful greaves, fitted with silver clasps. Next he placed around his breast a corslet which Cinyras once gave him, to be a pledge of hospitality. For a great rumour was heard at Cyprus, that the Greeks were about to sail to Troy in ships. Wherefore he gave him this, gratifying the king. 10 bars indeed of the corslet were of dark cyanus, 12 of gold, and 20 of tin, and 3 serpents of cyanus stretched towards the neck on each side, like unto rainbows, which the son of Saturn had fixed in a cloud, a sign to articulate speaking men. Then around his shoulders he hung his sword, on which glittered golden studs, and a silver scabbard enclosed it, fitted with golden rings. Next he took up his shield, mortal covering, variously wrought, strong, beautiful, around which were 10 brazen orbs. Upon it were 20 white bosses of tin, and in the midst was one of dark cyanus. On it a grim-visaged Gorgon was placed as an ornament, looking horribly, and around were terror and flight. The belt was of silver, but round it a snake of cyanus was twisted, and there were 3 heads entwined, springing from one neck. Upon his head also he placed his helmet, adorned with studs on all sides, having 4 bosses, crested with horsehair, and dreadfully nodded the tuft from above. He then took 2 strong spears, tipped with brass sharp, and the brass of them glittered afar, even to heaven, and Minerva and Juno thundered above, honouring the king of Mycenae, rich in gold. Then indeed he gave orders to his own charioteer to hold there his horses in good order by the fosse, whilst they themselves on foot, arrayed with their armour, rushed forth. And an inextinguishable clamour arose before morning, and they were marshalled into the foreground with the cavalry at the trench. The cavalry followed at a little interval. But the son of Saturn aroused a dreadful tumult, and sent down dew-drops, moist with blood, from the air above, because he was about to hurl many brave souls on to Hades. On the other side, on the contrary, the Trojans drew up on a hill in the plain around both mighty Hector, the blameless Polydamas, and Æneas, who among the Trojans was honoured by the people as a god, and the 3 sons of Antenor, Polybus, noble Agenor, and youthful Acamas, like unto the immortals. And Hector in the van carried his shield equal on all sides. And as when a pernicious star makes its appearance from the clouds, at one time shining, and dark again hath entered the clouds, so Hector, giving orders, appeared now among the first, and now among the last, and he glittered all over with brass, like the lightning of aegis-bearing Jove. And they, as when reapers opposite to each other form swaths of wheat or barley along the field of a rich man, and the frequent handfuls falls, so the Trojans and Greeks, rushing against one another, kept slaughtering, and neither thought of pernicious flight. And when they held their heads equal in combat, and rushed on like wolves, whilst lamentable Discord looking on exulted, for she alone of the gods was present with them contending, but the other gods were not present with them, but sat quiet in their palaces, where beautiful mansions were built for each, along the summits of Olympus. All, however, blamed the Saturnian collector of dark clouds, because he wished to afford glory to the Trojans. But the sire did not regard them, but retiring by himself, sat down apart from the others, exulting in glory, looking both upon the city of the Trojans, and the ships of the Greeks, and the brightness of armour, and the slaying and slain, Whilst it was morn, and the sacred day was increasing, so long the weapons reached both sides, and the people fell. But at the time when the woodcutter has prepared his repast in the dells of a mountain, when he has wearied his hands hewing down lofty trees, and satiety comes upon his mind, and the desire of sweet food seizes his breast, then the Greeks by their valour broke the phalanxes, cheering their companions along the ranks. But Agamemnon first leaped forth, and slew the hero Bianor, the shepherd of the people, and then his companion Oïleus, the goader of steeds. For he then, leaping from his chariot, stood against him, but he, Agamemnon, smote him, as he was rushing straight forward, with his sharp spear, in the forehead. Nor did the visor, heavy with brass, retard the weapon, but it penetrated both it and the bone, and all the brain within was stained with gore. Him then he subdued while eagerly rushing on, and Agamemnon, king of men, left them there with their bosoms all bare, for he had stripped off their tunics. Next he went against Isus and Anthipus, two sons of Priam, the one illegitimate, and the other legitimate, being both in one chariot, in order to slay them. The spurious son guided the chariot, whilst illustrious Antiphus fought. Them Achilles had once bound with tender osiers on the summits of Ida, taking them while pasturing their sheep, and had liberated them for a ransom. Then, however, the son of Atreus, wide-ruling Agamemnon, struck one upon the breast above the pap with his spear, and again he smote Antiphus beside the ear with his sword, and hurled him from his chariot. Hastening up, he despoiled them of their beautiful armour, recognizing them, for he had formerly seen them at the swift ships, then when swift-footed Achilles brought them from Ida, and as a lion returning to his lair easily crushes the little fawns of the fleet hind, seizing them in his strong teeth, and deprives them of their tender life, whilst she, also she happened to be very near, cannot aid them, for a dreadful tremor comes upon herself. But hastening, she immediately flies through the thick oak groves and the forest, sweating through the attack of the wild beast. Thus no one of the Trojans was then able to avert destruction from these, but they themselves were put to flight by the Greeks. Next he attacked Pisander and Hippolochus, brave in battle, the sons of warlike Antimachus, who, having accepted gold from Paris, rich gifts, would not suffer them to restore Helen to yellow-haired Menelaus. His two sons then Agamemnon, king of men, seized, being in one chariot, for they drove their fleet horses together. For the splendid reins had fallen from their hands, and they were confounded. But the son of Atreus rushed against them like a lion, and they, on the contrary, supplicated him from the chariot. "Take us alive, O son of Atreus, and thou shalt receive worthy ransoms. For many treasures lie in the houses of Antimachus, brass, gold, and variously wrought iron. From these would our father give infinite ransoms, if he should hear that we were alive at the ships of the Greeks." Thus both weeping addressed the king with soothing words, but heard an unsoothing reply. "If indeed ye be the sons of warlike Antimachus, who once in an assembly of the Trojans ordered that they should there be put to death Menelaus, coming as an ambassador along with godlike Ulysses, and not send him back to the Greeks, now surely shall ye pay the penalty of the unmerited insolence of your father." He said, and hurled Pisander from his horses to the ground, striking him on the breast with his spear, and he was stretched supine upon the soil. But Hippolochus leaped down, whom next he slew upon the ground, having lopped off his hands with his sword, and cut off his neck. And yet the head like a cylinder he hurled forward, to be rolled through the crowd. These then he left there, and where very many phalanxes were thrown into confusion, there he rushed, and at the same time other well-grieved Greeks. Infantry slew infantry, flying from necessity, and horse slew horse, slaughtering with the brass, whilst the dust was raised by them from the plain, which the loud-sounding feet of the horses excited. But King Agamemnon, constantly slaying, pursued, cheering on the Greeks, and as when a destructive fire falls upon a woody forest, and the wind, whirling, carries it on all sides, whilst the branches fall with the roots, overwhelmed by the violence of the flame, so fell the heads of the flying Trojans at the hands of Agamemnon, son of Atreus, and many lofty-necked steeds rattled their empty chariots through the ranks of the battle, longing for their faultless charioteers, but they lay upon the earth, far more agreeable to the vultures than to their wives. But Jove withdrew Hector out of the reach of weapons, of dust, of slaughter, blood, and tumult, whilst Atrides pursued, loudly cheering on the Danai. The Trojans meanwhile rushed through the middle of the plain toward the wild fig tree near the tomb of Ilus, the descendant of ancient Dardanus, eager to reach the city. But Atrides still followed shouting, and stained his invincible hands with dusty gore. But when now they reached the Scaean gates and the beech tree, there at length they halted, and awaited each other. Others, however, still fled through the middle of the plain, like oxen which a lion, coming at the depth of night, hath put tremblingly to flight. All but to some one dreadful destruction is apparent, whose neck he first completely breaks, seizing it in his strong teeth, and then laps up both the blood and all the entrails. Thus did the son of Atreus, King Agamemnon, follow them, always killing the hindermost. And they kept flying. Many fell prone and supine from their chariots by the hands of the son of Atreus, for before all others he raged exceedingly with the spear. But when now he was about soon to reach the city and the lofty wall, then indeed the father both of men and gods, descending from heaven, seated himself upon the top of Ida, of many rills, and he held the lightning in his hands, and aroused golden-winged Iris to bear his message. Come, swift Iris, deliver this message to Hector, as long as he may behold Agamemnon, the shepherd of the people, raging in the van, and destroying the ranks of men, so long let him retreat, and let him exhort the rest of the army to fight with the enemy during the violent contest. But when he, Agamemnon, shall have mounted his steeds, either smitten by a spear or wounded by an arrow, then will I supply him with strength to slay, until he reach the well-benched ships, and the sun set, and sacred darkness come on. Thus he spake, nor did rapid Iris, swift as the wind, on her feet disobey. But she descended from the mountains of Ida towards sacred Ilium. She found noble Hector, son of warlike Priam, standing in the midst of the horses and well-joined chariots. And having approached, swift-footed Iris addressed him. Hector, son of Priam, equal in counsel to Jove, Jove hath sent me forward to deliver to thee this message. As long as thou seest Agamemnon, the shepherd of the people, raging amongst the van, and destroying the ranks of men, so long do thou abstain from combat, but exhort the rest of the army to fight with the enemy during the violent contest. But when he shall have mounted his steeds, either smitten with a spear, or wounded by an arrow, then will he supply thee with strength to slay, until thou reach the well-benched ships, and the sun set, and sacred darkness come on. Thus having spoken, swift-footed Iris departed. But Hector with his armour sprang from his chariot to the ground, and brandishing sharp spears, ranged through the army on every side, inciting them to fight, and stirred up the dreadful battle. They indeed rallied and stood opposite to the Greeks, but the Greeks on the other hand strengthened their phalanxes, and the battle was renewed, and they stood front to front. But Agamemnon first rushed on, for he wished to fight far before all. Tell me now, ye Muses, possessing Olympian dwellings, who first, either of the Trojans or illustrious allies, now came against Agamemnon? Iphidamas, son of Antenor, both valiant and great, who was nurtured in fertile Thrace, the mother of flocks. Cisseus, his maternal grandfather, who begat fair-cheeked Theano, reared him in his house whilst yet a little boy. But when he had attained the measure of glorious youth, he there detained him, and gave him his own daughter. And having married her, he came from the bridal chamber on the rumour of the Greeks, with 12 curved vessels which followed him. The equal ships indeed he afterwards left at Percote, but he, proceeding on foot, had arrived at Troy, and he it was who then came against Agamemnon, the son of Atreus. When these, advancing against each other, were now near, the son of Atreus on his part missed, and his spear was turned aside. But Iphidamas smote him upon the belt, under the corslet, and he put his strength to it, relying on his strong hand. Yet he pierced not the flexible belt, but meeting with the silver long before, the point was turned like lead. Then indeed wide-ruling Agamemnon, seeing it in his hand, pulled it towards him, exasperated like a lion, and plucked it from his hand, and he smote him on the neck with his sword, and relaxed his limbs. Thus he, unhappy, while aiding his citizens, falling there, slept a brazen sleep, away from his lawful virgin wife, whose charms he had not yet known, although he had given many presents for her. First he gave 100 oxen, and then he promised 1,000 goats and sheep together, which were pastured for him in countless numbers. Him Agamemnon, son of Atreus, at that time stripped of his arms, and went through the army of the Greeks, bearing his rich armour. Whom when Coon, the eldest born of Antenor, conspicuous amongst men, then beheld, violent grief darkened his eyes, for his brother having fallen, and he stood aside with his dark spear, escaping the notice of noble Agamemnon. And he wounded him in the middle of the arm, below the elbow, and the point of the shining spear passed right through to the other side. Then indeed Agamemnon, the king of men, shuddered, but not even thus did he abstain from battle or from war, but he rushed upon Coon, holding his wind-nurtured spear. He on his part was eagerly dragging by the foot Iphidamas his brother, and begotten by the same father, and was calling upon every brave man, when Agamemnon wounded him with his polished brazen spear below the bossy shield, whilst dragging him through the crowd, and relaxed his limbs, and standing beside him, cut off his head over Iphidamas. There the sons of Antenor, fulfilling their destiny at the hands of the king, the son of Atreus, descended to the abode of Hades. But he was ranging about through the ranks of the other men with his spear, his sword, and huge stones, whilst the warm blood yet oozed from his wound. When, however, the wound grew dry, and the blood ceased to flow, sharp pains possessed the strength of Atreus' son, and as when the sharp pang seizes a woman in travail, piercing, which the Eleithia, daughters of Juno, who preside over childbirth, send forth, keeping bitter pangs in their possession, so did sharp anguish enter the strength of the son of Atreus, and he sprang into his chariot, and ordered his charioteer to drive on to the hollow ships, for he was tortured at heart. And vociferating, he shouted aloud to the Greeks, "O friends, leaders, and rulers over the Argives, repel ye now the severe battle from the sea-traversing barks, since provident Jove does not permit me to combat all day with the Trojans." Thus he spoke, and the charioteer lashed on the fair-maned steeds toward the hollow ships, and they, not unwilling, flew. They were covered with foam as to their breasts, and were sprinkled beneath with dust, as they bore the afflicted king apart from the battle. But Hector, when he observed Agamemnon going apart, exhorted both the Trojans and Lycians, shouting aloud, "Ye Trojans, Lycians, and close-fighting Dardanians, be men, my friends, and be mindful of impetuous might. The bravest hero has departed, and Saturnian Jove has given great glory to me. But straightway urge your solid-hoofed horses against the gallant Greeks, that ye may bear off higher glory." Thus saying, he aroused the courage and spirit of each, as when perchance some huntsman should urge his white-toothed dogs against a rustic wild boar or lion. So Hector, the son of Priam, equal to man-slaughtering Mars, urged the magnanimous Trojans against the Greeks. He himself, having mighty courage, advanced among the first, and rushed into the battle, like unto a storm blowing from above, and which, rushing down, stirs up the purple deep. Then whom first and whom last did Hector, son of Priam, slay when Jove gave him glory? Asaius indeed first, and Autonous, and Opites, and Dolops, son of Clytus, and Opheltius, and Agelaus, and Asimnus, and Horus, and Orus, and Hipponos, persevering in fight. These leaders of the Greeks he then slew, and afterwards the common crowd, as when the west wind drives to and fro the clouds of the impetuous south, lashing them with an impetuous blast, and many a swollen billow is rolled along, whilst the foam is scattered on high by the far-straying blast of the wind. Thus were many heads of the people subdued by Hector. Then indeed would there have been ruin, an inevitable deed had been done, and the flying Greeks had fallen in flight into their ships, had not Ulysses encouraged Diomede, the son of Tydeus. "Son of Tydeus, through what cause are we forgetful of impetuous might? But come hither, my friend, stand by me, for surely it will be a disgrace if indeed crest-tossing Hector take the ships." Him then valiant Diomede answering addressed, "I indeed will remain and be courageous, although there will be little use for us, since cloud-compelling Jove chooses to give glory to the Trojans rather than to us." He said, and hurled Thrymbaeus from his chariot to the ground, striking him with his spear upon the left pap. But Ulysses slew Molion, the godlike attendant of the king. These then they left, since they caused them to cease from war. Then both, advancing through the multitude, excited confusion, as when two boars full of courage rush upon the hounds. So they, returning to the fight, cut down the Trojans, and the Greeks joyfully gained a respite, avoiding noble Hector. Next they took a chariot and 2 warriors, the bravest of the people, the 2 sons of Precosian Merops, who above all was skilled in augury, nor would permit his sons to march to the man-destroying war. Yet did they not obey him, because the destinies of black death led them on. Them spear-renowned Diomede, the son of Tydeus, depriving of life and breath, despoiled of their splendid armour. And Ulysses slew Hippodamas and Hyperochus. Then the son of Saturn, looking down from Ida, stretched for them the contest with equal tension, and they slaughtered one another. The son of Tydeus indeed wounded on the hip with his spear the hero Agastrophus, son of Paeon, for his horses were not at hand for him to take flight. But he had erred greatly in his mind, for his attendant kept them apart, whilst he rushed on foot through the foremost combatants, till he lost his life. But Hector quickly perceived it along the ranks, and hastened towards them, shouting, and with him followed the phalanxes of the Trojans. Diomede, brave in the din of battle, beholding him, shuddered, and immediately addressed Ulysses, who was near. "Towards us is this great destruction, dreadful Hector, now rolled. But come, let us stand firm, and awaiting, repulse him." He said, and brandishing his long-shadowed spear, hurled it, and smote him on the summit of the helmet on his head. Nor aiming did he miss. But brass wandered from brass, nor did it reach the white skin, for the threefold oblong helmet stopped it, which Phoebus Apollo had given him. Hector hastily retired to a distance, and was mingled with the crowd. And he, Hector, falling upon his knee, remained so, and supported himself with his strong hand against the earth, whilst dark night overshadowed his eyes. But whilst the son of Tydeus was following after the impulse of the spear far through the foremost combatants, where it was fixed in the earth, Hector in the meantime breathed again, and springing again into his chariot, drove into the crowd, and avoided black death. And valiant Diomede, rushing upon him with his spear, addressed him, "Dog, thou hast escaped indeed death at present, although destruction approached near thee. Now again has Phoebus Apollo rescued thee, to whom thou art wont to offer prayers, advancing into the clash of spears. But I will assuredly make an end of thee, meeting thee again, if perchance any one of the gods be an ally to me. Now, however, I will go against others, whomsoever I can find." He said, and slew the spear-renowned son of Paeon. But Paris, the husband of fair-haired Helen, leaning against a pillar, at the tomb of the deceased hero Dardanius Ilus, the aged leader of the people, bent his bow against the son of Tydeus, the shepherd of the people. Whilst he was removing the variegated corslet from the breast of gallant Agastrophus, the shield from his shoulders, and his heavy casque, he, Paris, in the meantime was drawing back the horn of his bow, and struck him on the broad part of the right foot. Nor did the weapon escape in vain from his hand, and the arrow went entirely into the ground, and he, laughing very joyfully, sprang from his ambuscade, and boasting spoke, "Thou art struck, nor has the weapon escaped me in vain. Would that striking thee in the lower part of the groin I had deprived thee of life. Thus indeed would the Trojans have respired from destruction, who now are thrilled with horror at thee, as bleating goats at the lion." But him valiant Diomede, undismayed, addressed, "Archer, reviler, decked out with curls, woman's man, if now in arms thou wouldst make trial of me, hand to hand, thy bow should not avail thee, and numerous arrows, whereas now, having grazed a broad part of my foot, thou boastest thus. I regard it not, as though a woman had wounded me, or a silly boy. For idle is the weapon of an unwarlike, good-for-nothing man. From me, indeed, it is otherwise, for if one be touched but slightly, the weapon is piercing, and forthwith renders him lifeless, and the cheeks of his wife are furrowed on both sides, and his children are orphans. But crimsoning the earth with his blood, he putrefies, and the birds around him are more numerous than the women." Thus he spoke. But spear-renowned Ulysses coming near, stood before him, and he, Diomede, sitting down behind him, drew the swift shaft out of his foot, and severe agony darted through his body. Then he leaped into his chariot, and commanded his charioteer to drive to the hollow ships, for he was grieved at heart. But spear-renowned Ulysses was left alone, nor did any of the Greeks remain beside him, as fear had seized upon all. Wherefore, groaning inwardly, he addressed his own mighty soul, "Alas, what will become of me? Great would be the disgrace if I fly, alarmed at the multitude, but worse would it be if I were taken alone. But the son of Saturn has struck the rest of the Greeks with terror. But wherefore does my spirit discuss these things with me? For I know that cowards indeed retire from the battle. But whosoever should be brave in combat, it is altogether necessary that he stand firmly, whether he be wounded, or wound another." Whilst he revolved these things within his mind and soul, the ranks of the shielded Trojans in the meantime came upon him, and enclosed him in the midst, placing their bane in the midst of them. As when dogs and vigorous youths rush against a boar on all sides, but he comes out from a deep thicket, sharpening his white tusk with his crooked jaws. On all sides they rushed upon him, and a gnashing of teeth arises, but they remain at a distance from him, terrible as he is. So the Trojans did rush round Ulysses, dear to Jove. But he wounded above the shoulder blameless Diopetes, springing upon him with his sharp spear, and afterwards he slew Thoon and Enomus. With his spear he next wounded Chersidamus, when leaping from his chariot, in the navel below his bossed shield. Falling amid the dust, grasped the earth with the hollow of his hand. These indeed he left, and next wounded with his spear Cherops, son of Hippasus, and brother of noble Socus. But Socus, godlike hero, hastened to give him aid, and approaching very near, he stood, and addressed him in these words, "O illustrious Ulysses, insatiable in crafts and toil, to-day shalt thou either boast over the 2 sons of Hippasus, having slain such heroes, and stripped them of their arms, or else, stricken by my spear, thou shalt lose thy life." Thus saying, he smote him upon the shield equal on all sides. The rapid weapon penetrated the shining shield, and was fixed through the curiously wrought corslet, and tore off all the skin from his sides. But Pallas Minerva suffered it not to be mingled with the entrails of the hero. And Ulysses perceived that the weapon had not come upon him mortally, and retiring he addressed this speech to Socus: "Ah, wretch! Very soon indeed will dreadful destruction overtake thee. Without doubt thou hast caused me to cease from fighting with the Trojans, but I declare that death and black fate shall be thine this day, and that subdued beneath my spear thou shalt give glory to me, and thy soul to steed-famed Pluto." He said, and the other, turning again to flight, had begun to retreat, but whilst he was turning, Ulysses fixed his spear in his back between the shoulders, and drove it through his breast. Falling, he made a crash, and noble Ulysses boasted over him: "O Socus, son of warlike horse-breaking Hippasus, the end of death has anticipated thee, nor hast thou escaped. Ah, wretch! Neither thy father nor venerable mother shall close thine eyes for thee, dead as thou art, but ravenous birds shall tear thee, flapping about thee with dense wings. But when I die, the noble Greeks will pay me funeral honours." So saying, he plucked the strong spear of warlike Socus out of his flesh and bossy shield, and his blood gushed forth as he drew it out, and tortured his mind. But the magnanimous Trojans, when they beheld the blood of Ulysses, encouraging one another through the crowd, all rushed on against him, whilst he kept retreating backwards, and called to his companions. Thrice did he then shout as much as the head of mortal could contain, and thrice warlike Menelaus heard him exclaiming, and instantly addressed Ajax, being near: "Most noble Ajax, son of Telamon, chieftain of the people, the cry of invincible Ulysses has come upon me, like to that, as if the Trojans were greatly pressing upon him, being alone, having cut him off in the sharp fight. Wherefore let us go through the crowd, as it is better to aid him. I fear lest being left alone amidst the Trojans, he suffer aught, although being brave, and there be great want of him to the Greeks." Thus speaking, he led the way, and the godlike hero followed along with him. Then they found Ulysses, dear to Jove, and around him followed the Trojans, like tawny jackals round a tiered stag when wounded in the mountains, which a man hath stricken with an arrow from the bowstring. Him indeed flying, it escapes on its feet, as long as the blood is warm, and its knees have the power of motion. But when the swift arrow hath subdued it, the raw-devouring jackals destroy it in a shady grove among the mountains. Chance, however, brings thither the destructive lion. The jackals then fly in terror, and he devours it. So at that time followed the Trojans, numerous and brave, round warlike, crafty Ulysses. But the hero, rushing on with his spear, warded off the merciless day. Then Ajax came near, bearing his shield, like a tower, and stood beside him, and the Trojans fled, terrified, different ways. In the meantime warlike Menelaus, taking him by the hand, withdrew him from the throng, till his attendant drove his horses near. But Ajax, springing upon the Trojans, slew Doryclus, son of Priam, an illegitimate son, and next wounded Pandocus. Lysander he wounded, and Pyrasus, and Pylartes, and as when an overflowing river comes down on the plain, a torrent from the mountains, accompanied by the shower of Jove, and bears along with it many dry oaks and many pines, and casts forth the swollen torrent into the sea, so illustrious Ajax, routing them, pursued them along the plain, slaughtering both horses and men. Nor as yet had Hector heard it, for he was fighting on the left of the battle, on the banks of the river Scamander, for there chiefly fell the heads of men, and an inextinguishable clamour had arisen around mighty Nestor, and warlike Idomeneus. Among these did Hector mingle, performing arduous deeds with his spear and equestrian skill, and he was laying waste the phalanxes of youths. Nevertheless the noble Greeks would have not retired from the way, had not Paris, the husband of fair-haired Helen, disabled Machaon, the shepherd of the people, performing prodigies of valour, wounding him on the right shoulder with a triple-barbed arrow. For him then the valour-breathing Greeks trembled, lest perchance they should slay him, the battle giving way, and immediately Idomeneus addressed noble Nectar: "O Nelean Nestor, great glory of the Greeks, come, ascend thy chariot, and let Machaon mount beside thee, and direct thy solid-hoofed horses with all speed towards the ships. For a medical man is equivalent to many others, both to cut out arrows and to apply mild remedies." Thus he spoke, nor did the Gerenian knight Nestor disobey. Forthwith he ascended his chariot, and Machaon, the son of Aesculapius, blameless physician, mounted beside him. But he lashed on the steeds, and they flew not unwillingly towards the hollow ships, for there it was agreeable to their inclination to go. But Cebriones, sitting beside Hector, perceived the Trojans in confusion, and addressed him in these words: "Hector, we two are mingling here with the Greeks in the outskirt of evil-sounding battle, whilst the other Trojans are thrown into confusion in crowds, both their horses and themselves. Telamonian Ajax is routing them, for I know him well, for around his shoulders he bears a broad shield. But let us also direct our horses and a chariot thither, where cavalry and infantry, having engaged in the evil strife, are slaughtering each other, and inextinguishable tumult hath arisen." Thus then, having spoken, he lashed on the fair-maned steeds with his shrill cracking lash. But they, sensible of the stroke, speedily bore the swift chariot through Trojans and Greeks, trampling on both corpses and shields. With blood the whole axle tree was stained beneath, and the rims around the chariot seat, which the drops from the horses' hoofs, and from the wheel-tires spattered. But he longed to enter the crowd of heroes, and to break through, springing upon them. And he sent destructive tumult upon the Greeks, and abstained very little from the spear. Among the ranks of other men indeed he ranged with his spear, his sword, and with huge stones. But he shunned the conflict of Telamonian Ajax. But lofty-throned Jove excited fear within Ajax, and he stood confounded, and cast behind him his shield of 7 bulls' hides. Panic-struck he retired, gazing on all sides like a wild beast, turning to and fro, slowly moving knee after knee, as when dogs and rustic men drive a ravening lion from the stall of oxen, who, keeping watch all night, do not allow him to carry off the fat of their cattle. But he, eager for their flesh, rushes on, but profits not, for numerous javelins fly against him from daring hands, and blazing torches, at which he trembles, although furious. But in the morning he stalks away with saddened mind. So Ajax, sad at heart, then retired, much against his will, from the Trojans, for he feared for the ships of the Greeks. And as when a stubborn ass, upon whose sides many sticks have already been broken, entering in, browses on the tall crop, but the boys still beat him with sticks, although their strength is but feeble, and with difficulty drive him out, when he is satiated with food, so then at length the magnanimous Trojans and far-summoned allies continually followed Ajax, the mighty son of Telamon, strike in the middle of his shield with missile weapons. And Ajax, sometimes wheeling about, was mindful of impetuous might, and checked the phalanxes of the horse-breaking Trojans. But again he would turn himself to fly. But he prevented all from advancing to the swift ships, while standing himself between the Trojans and Greeks he raged impetuously. And spears hurled against him from daring hands stuck, some indeed in his ample shield, and many, though eager to glut themselves with his flesh, stood fixed in the ground between, before they could reach his fair skin. Whom when Eurypylus, the illustrious son of Evaemon, perceived pressed hard with many darts, advancing he stood beside him, and took aim with his shining spear, and smote Apisaon, son of Phocius, shepherd of the people, in the liver, under the diaphragm, and immediately relaxed his limbs. And when godlike Alexander observed him stripping off the armour of Apisaon, he instantly bent his bow against Eurypylus, and smote him with an arrow upon the right thigh, and the reed was broken, and pained his thigh. Then he fell back into the column of his companions, avoiding fate, and shouting, he cried with a loud voice to the Greeks, "O friends, leaders, and rulers of the Greeks, rallying, stand firm, and ward off the merciless day from Ajax, who is hard pressed with darts. Nor do I think that he will escape from the dread resounding battle. But by all means stand firm round mighty Ajax, the son of Telamon." So spake the wounded Eurypylus, and they stood very near him, resting their shields upon their shoulders, and lifting up their spears. But Ajax came to meet them, and turning about, stood firm when he reached the body of his comrades. Thus they indeed combated like blazing fire. In the meantime the Nelean steeds, sweating, bore Nestor from the battle, and conveyed Machaon, the shepherd of the people. And noble Achilles, swift of foot, looking forth, beheld him, for he stood upon the prow of his great ship, gazing at the severe labour and lamentable rout. Straightway he addressed Patroclus, his companion, calling to him from the ship. And he, hearing him within the tent, came forth like unto Mars. But it was the beginning of the misfortune to him. Him first the gallant son of Menœtius addressed, "Why dost thou call me Achilles, and what need hast thou of me?" But him swift-footed Achilles answering addressed, "Noble son of Menœtius, most dear to my soul, soon I think that the Greeks will stand round my knees entreating, for a necessity no longer tolerable invades them. But go now, Patroclus, dear to Jove, ask Nestor what man this is whom he is carrying wounded from the battle. Behind, indeed, he wholly resembles Machaon, the son of Æsculapius, but I have not beheld the countenance of the man, for the horses passed by me, hastening onward." Thus he spoke, and Patroclus was obedient to his dear comrade, and hastened to run to the tents and ships of the Greeks. But when they came to the tent of the son of Neleus, they themselves descended to the fertile earth, and Eurymedon, the attendant of the old man, unyoked the mares from the chariot, whilst they refreshed themselves from the sweat upon their tunics, standing towards the breeze beside the shore of the sea. And afterwards, entering the tent, they sat down upon couches. But for them fair-curled Hecamede prepared a mixture, she whom the old man had brought from Tenedos, whom when Achilles laid it waste, the daughter of magnanimous Arsinoe, whom the Greeks selected for him, because he surpassed all in counsel. First she set forward for them a handsome, cyanus-footed, well-polished table. Then upon it a brazen tray, and on it an onion, a relish for the draught, as well as new honey, and beside it the fruit of sacred corn. Likewise a splendid cup near them, which the old man had brought from home, studded with golden nails. Its handles were 4, and around each were 2 golden pigeons feeding, and under it were 2 bottoms. Another indeed would have removed it with difficulty from the table, being full, but aged Nestor raised it without difficulty. In it the woman, like unto the goddesses, had mixed for them Pramnian wine, and grated over it a goat's milk cheese with a brazen rasp, and sprinkled white flour upon it. Then bade them drink, as soon as she had prepared the potion. But when drinking they had removed parching thirst, they amused themselves, addressing each other in conversation. And Patroclus stood at the doors, a godlike hero. But the old man, perceiving him, rose from his splendid seat, and taking him by the hand, led him in, and bade him be seated. But Patroclus on the other side declined, and uttered this reply: "No seat for me, O Jove-nurtured sage, nor wilt thou persuade me. Revered and irascible is he who sent me forth to inquire who this man is whom thou leadest wounded. But even I myself know, for I perceive Machaon, the shepherd of the people. Now, however, in order to deliver my message, I will return again an ambassador to Achilles. For well dost thou know, O Jove-nurtured sage, what a terrible man he is. Soon would he blame even the blameless." But him the Gerenian knight Nestor then answered: "But why indeed does Achilles thus compassionate the sons of the Greeks, as many as have been wounded with weapons? Nor knows he how great sorrow hath arisen throughout the army, for the bravest lie in the ships, smitten in the distant or the close fight. Stricken is brave Diomede, the son of Tydeus, and wounded is spear-renowned Ulysses, as well as Agamemnon. Eurypylus also has been wounded in the thigh with an arrow, and this other have I lately brought from battle, smitten with an arrow from the bowstring. Yet Achilles, being brave, regards not the Greeks, nor pities them. Does he wait until the swift ships near the sea, contrary to the will of the Greeks, be consumed with the hostile fire, and we ourselves be slain one after the other? For my strength is not as it formerly was in my active members. Would that I were thus young, and my might was firm, as when a contest took place between the Eleans and us, about the driving away some oxen, when driving away in reprisal I slew Itymoneus, the valiant son of Hyperochus, who dwelt in Elis, for he, defending his cattle, was smitten among the first by a javelin from my hand, and there fell, and his rustic troops fled on every side. And we drove from the plain a very great booty, 50 droves of oxen, as many flocks of sheep, as many herds of swine, and as many broad herds of goats, 150 yellow steeds, all mares, and beneath many there were colts. And these we drove with Nelean Pylus at night towards the city. But Neleus was delighted in his mind, because many things had fallen to my lot, going as a young man to the war. But with the appearing morn, heralds cried aloud for those to approach to whom a debt was due in rich Elis. And the leading heroes of the Pylians, assembling, divided the spoil, because the Epeians owed a debt to many. For we in Pylus, being few, were overwhelmed by evil. For the Herculean might, coming in former years, did us mischief, and as many as were bravest were slain. For we, the son of illustrious Neleus, were 12, of whom I alone am left, but all the rest have perished. Elated at these things, the brazen-mailed Epeans, insulting us, devised wicked deeds. But the old man chose for himself a herd of cattle and a large flock of sheep, selecting 300 and their shepherds. For even to him a great debt was due in rich Elis, 4 horses victorious in the race with their chariots, which had gone for the prizes, for they were about to run for a tripod. But Ogyas, king of men, detained them there, and dismissed the charioteer, grieved on account of his steeds. At which words and deeds the old man, being wroth, chose out for himself mighty numbers, and gave the rest to the people to divide, that no one might go away defrauded by him of his just proportion. We indeed accomplished each of these things, and were performing sacrifices to the gods through the city, when on the 3rd day they all came at once, both the citizens themselves and their solid-hoofed steeds, in full force, and with them were armed the 2 Molians, being still youths, nor as yet very skilled in impetuous might. There is a certain city, a lofty hill, Thryoessa, far away at the Alpheus, the last of sandy Pylus. This they invested, eager to overthrow it. But when they had crossed the whole plain, Minerva, hastening from Olympus, came to us by night as a messenger, that we should be armed. Nor did she assemble an unwilling people at Pylus, but one very eager to fight. Still Naias would not allow me to be armed, but concealed my horses, for he said that I was not at all acquainted with warlike deeds. Yet even thus was I conspicuous amongst our cavalry, even although being on foot, for thus did Minerva conduct me to battle. There is a certain river, Mineus, emptying itself into the sea near Arena, where we, the Pylian horsemen, awaited divine morn, whilst the swarms of infantry poured in. Thence in full force, equipped in armour, we came at midday to the sacred streams of Alpheus. There having offered fair victims to almighty Jove, a bull to the Alpheus, and a bull to Neptune, but an untrained heifer to blue-eyed Minerva, we then took supper through the army by troops, and we each slept in our arms along the river's stream. In the meantime the magnanimous Epeans stood around, desirous to lay waste the city. But a mighty work of Mars first appeared to them. For as soon as the splendid sun was elevated above the earth, we were engaged in the battle, praying to Jove and to Minerva. But when now the battle of the Pylians and Eleans began, I first slew a man, the warrior Molion, and bore away his solid-hoofed steeds. He was the son-in-law of Ogyas, and possessed his eldest daughter, yellow-haired Agamede, who well understood as many drugs as the wide earth nourishes. Him advancing against me, I smote with my brazen spear. He fell in the dust, and springing into his chariot, I then stood among the foremost combatants. But the magnanimous Epeans fled terrified in different directions, when they beheld the hero fallen, the leader of their cavalry, he who was the best to fight. But I rushed upon them like unto a black whirlwind, and I took 50 chariots, and in each 2 men bit the ground with their teeth, vanquished by my spear. And now indeed I should have slain the youthful Molions, the sons of Actor, had not their sire, wide-ruling Neptune, covering them with a thick haze, preserved them from war. Then Jove delivered into the hands of the Pylians great strength, for so long did we follow them through the long plain, both slaying them, and gathering up rich armour, until he had driven our horses to Buprasium, fertile in wheat, to the rock Olenia and Elysium, where it is called Cologne, whence Minerva turned back the people. Then having killed the last man, I left him. But the Greeks guided back their swift steeds from Buprasium to Pylus, and all gave glory to Jove of the gods and to Nestor of men. Thus was I, as sure as I ever existed, among men. But Achilles will enjoy his valour alone. Surely I think that he will hereafter greatly lament, when the people have bitterly perished. O my friend, Menœtius did assuredly thus command thee on that day when he sent thee from Phthia to Agamemnon, for we being both within, I and noble Ulysses distinctly heard all things in the halls, as he charged you. But we were come to the well-inhabited palace of Peleus, collecting an army through fertile Greece. There then we found the hero Menœtius within, as well as thee, and Achilles besides. But the aged horseman Peleus was burning the fat thighs of an ox to thunder rejoicing Jove within the enclosure of his palace, and held a golden cup, pouring the dark wine over the blazing sacrifice. Both of you were then employed about the flesh of the ox, whilst we stood in the vestibule. But Achilles, astonished, leaped up, and led us in, taking us by the hand, and bade us be seated. And he set in order before us the offerings of hospitality, which are proper for guests. But when we were satiated with eating and drinking, I began discourse, exhorting you to follow along with us. Ye were both very willing, and they both commanded you many things. Aged Peleus in the first place directed his son Achilles ever to be the bravest, and to be conspicuous above others. But to thee again Menœtius, the son of Actor, thus gave charge. My son Achilles indeed is superior in birth, but thou art the elder, and he is much superior in strength, but still do thou frequently suggest to him proper advice, and admonish and direct him, and he will surely be obedient in what is for his own good. Thus did the old man command thee, but thou art forgetful. But even now do thou mention these things to warlike Achilles, if perchance he may be obedient. Who knows if advising him thou mayest, with the gods' assistance, arouse his mind? For the admonition of a friend is good, but if within his mind he avoids some prophecy, and his venerable mother has told him anything from Jove, let him at least send thee forth, and with thee let the other forces of the Myrmidons follow, if indeed thou mayest be some aid to the Greeks. Let him likewise give his beautiful armour to thee, to be borne into battle, if perchance the Trojans, assimilating thee to him, may abstain from the conflict, and the warlike sons of the Greeks, already afflicted, may respire, and there be a little respite from fighting. But you who are fresh, will with fighting easily drive back men wearied towards the city, from the ships and the tents. Thus he spake, and he aroused the spirit within his breast, and he hastened to run to the ships to Achilles, the grandson of Aeacus. But when now Patroclus running arrived at the ships of godlike Ulysses, where were their forum and seat of justice, and there the altars of their gods also were erected, there Eurypylus, the son of Vaemon, wounded with an arrow in the thigh, limping from the battle, met him. Down his back ran the copious sweat from his shoulders and head, and from the grievous wound oozed the black blood. Nevertheless his mind was firm. Seeing him, the gallant son of Menœtius pitied him, and grieving spoke winged words. Alas, unhappy men, leaders and rulers over the Greeks, are ye then thus destined, far away from your friends and native land, to satiate the swift dogs at Troy with your white fat? But come, tell me this, O Jove-nurtured hero, Eurypylus, will the Greeks still at all sustain mighty Hector, or will they now be destroyed, subdued by his spear? But him prudent Eurypylus in turn addressed. No longer, Jove-nurtured Patroclus, will there be aid for the Greeks, but they will fall back upon the black ships, for already all, as many as were once bravest, lie at the ships, stricken or wounded by the hands of the Trojans, whose strength ever increases. But do thou indeed save me, leading me back to my black ship, and cut out the arrow from my thigh, and wash the black blood from it with warm water. Then sprinkle upon it mild drugs, salubrious, which they say thou wert taught by Achilles, whom Chiron instructed, the most just of the Centaurs. For the physicians Polydarius and Machaon, the one, I think, having a wound, lies at the tents, and himself in want of a faultless physician, and the other awaits a sharp battle of the Trojans upon the plain. But him again the brave son of Menœtius addressed. How then will these things turn out? What shall we do, O hero Eurypylus? I go that I may deliver a message to warlike Achilles, with which venerable Nestor, guardian of the Greeks, has entrusted me. But even thus I cannot neglect thee afflicted. He said, and having laid hold of the shepherd of the people under his breast, bore him to the tent, and his attendant, when he saw this, spread under him bulls' hides. There Patroclus, laying him at length, cut out with a knife the bitter sharp arrow from his thigh, and washed the black blood from it with warm water. Then he applied a bitter pain-assuaging root, rubbing it in his hands, which checked all his pangs. The wound indeed was dried up, and the bleeding ceased. End of Book the 11th. Section 12, Book the 12th. Argument. Thus, then, the Trojans assail the rampart, and Hector, despite an omen, which Polydamas interprets unfavourably, attacks and forces the gate, and opens a way to the ships. Thus then at the tents the valiant son of Menoetius was healing the wounded Eurypylus, but the Greeks and Trojans kept fighting in masses, nor was the ditch of the Greeks destined to prove a barrier any longer, and the wide wall from above, which they had erected in defence of the ships. But they had drawn a fosse around, nor had they given splendid hecatombs to the gods, that it enclosing within might defend the swift ships and the great booty. But it was built against the will of the immortal gods, therefore it remained not perfect for any long period. As long as Hector was alive, and Achilles indignant, and the city of King Priam unravaged, so long was the mighty wall of the Greeks firm. But when all the bravest of the Trojans were dead, and many of the Greeks were subdued, but others left surviving, when in the 10th year the city of Priam was sacked, and the Greeks went in their ships to their dear fatherland, then at length Neptune and Apollo took counsel to demolish the wall, introducing the strength of rivers, as many as flow into the sea from the Idaean mountains, both the Rhesus and the Heptoporus, and the Caresus and the Rhodius, the Granicus and the Aesipus, the divine Scamander and the Simois, where many shields and helmets fell in the dust, and the race of demigod men. The mouths of all these Phoebus Apollo turned to the same spot, and for 9 days he directed their streams against the wall. And Jove in the meantime reigned continually, that he might the sooner render the walls overwhelmed by the sea. But the earth-shaker, Neptune himself, holding the trident in his hands, led them on, and then dispersed among the billows all the foundations of beams and stones which the Greeks had laid with toil. And he made all level along the rapid Hellespont, and again covered the vast shore with sands, having demolished the wall. But then he turned the rivers to go back into their own channels, in which they had formerly poured their sweet-flowing water. Thus were Neptune and Apollo about to act hereafter. But then the battle and clamour burned around the well-built wall, and the stricken joists of the towers resounded. But the Greeks, subdued by the scourge of Jove, were detained, hemmed in at the hollow ships, dreading Hector, the furious cause of flight. For he fought, as formerly, equal to a whirlwind, and as when a boar or lion is occupied amongst the dogs and huntsmen, looking dreadfully with strength, and they, drawing themselves up in a square form, stand against him, and hurl frequent javelins from their hands. But never is his noble heart alarmed, nor is he put to flight, but his courage proves his death. And frequently he turns round, trying the ranks of men, and wheresoever he has directed his attack, there the ranks of men give way. So Hector, going through the crowd, rolled along, inciting his companions to cross the trench. Nor did the swift-footed horses dare it, but they loudly neighed, standing upon the precipitous brink. For the wide ditch affrighted them, nor was it easy to leap across by standing near or to pass it, for overhanging brinks stood round it on both sides, and beneath it was fortified with sharp palisades, which the sons of the Greeks had fixed, close set and large, as a defence against hostile men. There a horse, drawing a swift rolling chariot, could not readily enter, but the infantry eagerly desired it, if they could accomplish it. Then indeed Polydamas, standing near, addressed daring Hector. Hector, and ye other leaders of the Trojans and allies, unwisely do we drive our fleet steeds through the trench, which is very difficult to pass, since sharp palisades stand in it, and near them is the wall of the Greeks. Wherefore it is by no means possible for the cavalry to descend or to fight, for it is a narrow place, where I think they would be wounded. For if indeed lofty thundering Jove, designing evil, destroys the Greeks, but wishes to assist the Trojans, certainly I would wish this to take place even immediately, that the Greeks perish here inglorious, away from Argos. If indeed they rally, and a repulse from the ships take place, and we be entangled in the dug trench, I do not suppose that then even a messenger will return back to the city from the Greeks. But come, let us all be persuaded as I shall advise. Let the servants keep our horses at the trench, and let us, all on foot, clad in armour, follow Hector in a close body. But the Greeks will not withstand us, if indeed the end of destruction hang over them. Thus spake Polydamas. But the safe counsel pleased Hector, and immediately he leaped with his armour from his chariot on the ground. Nor did the other Trojans assemble on horseback, but dismounting, they rushed on, when they beheld noble Hector. Then each commanded his own charioteer to rein his steeds in good order there at the trench, and they, separating, drawing themselves up, and being arranged in 5 columns, followed along with their leaders. Some then went with Hector and illustrious Polydamas, who were most numerous and brave, and who were most resolutely desirous, having broken down the wall, to fight at the hollow ships. And Cebriones followed as a third, for Hector left another inferior to Cebriones with his chariot. Others Paris commanded, and Alcathous, and Agenor. The third band, Helenus and godlike Deiphobus, two sons of Priam. But the third commander was the hero Asius, son of Hyrtacus, whom fiery, tall steeds brought from Arisba, from the river Selleis. But the fourth, Aeneas, the brave son of Anchises, led. Along with him were the two sons of Antenor, Archilochus and Acamas, well skilled in every kind of fight. But Sarpedon commanded the illustrious allies, and chose to himself Glaucus and warlike Asteropaeus, for they appeared to him, next to himself, decidedly the bravest of the rest. For he, indeed, excelled among all. When they then had fitted each other together with interlaced ox-hide bucklers, they advanced, full of courage, direct against the Greeks, nor expected that they would sustain them, but that they would fall in flight into their black ships. Then the other Trojans and far-summoned allies obeyed the counsel of blameless Polydamas. But Asius, son of Hyrtacus, leader of heroes, was unwilling to relinquish his horses and attendant charioteer, but with them advanced to the swift ships. Foolish! Nor was he destined to return again, borne on his steeds and chariot, from the ships to wind-swept Ilium, having avoided evil destiny. For him unlucky fate first encircled from the spear of Idomeneus, the illustrious son of Deucalion, where he rushed towards the left of the ships, by the way in which the Greeks were returning from the plain with their horses and chariots. Thither he drove his horses and his chariot, nor did he find the gates closed in the portal, or the long bar up. But the men held them wide open, that they might safely receive at the ships any of their companions flying from the battle. He designedly guided his steeds right onward in that way, and his troops, shrilly shouting, followed along with him. For they supposed that the Greeks could no longer sustain them, but would fail in flight into the black ships. Fools! For at the gates they found two very brave heroes, the magnanimous sons of the warlike Lapithia, the one the son of Pirithous, gallant Polypoetes, the other Leontius, equal to manslaughtering Mars. These two then stood before the lofty gates as tall oaks on the mountains, which abide the wind and rain at all seasons, remaining firmly fixed by their great and wide-spreading roots. So they too, trusting to their hands and strength, awaited mighty Asius coming on, nor fled. But the troops, lifting high their well-seasoned bucklers, advanced with loud shouting directly towards the well-built wall, round their king Asius, and Iamenus, and Orestes, Acamas, the son of Asius, Thun, and Oenomaus. Hitherto, indeed, these, remaining within, were exhorting the well-armed Greeks to fight for the ships. But when they perceived the Trojans rushing against the wall, and confusion and flight of the Greeks arose, both darting out, fought before the gates, like unto wild boars, which await the approaching tumult of men and dogs in the mountains, and, advancing obliquely to the attack, break down the wood around them, cutting it to the root, and a gnashing of teeth arises from beneath, till someone, having taken aim, deprive them of life. So resounded the shining brass upon their breasts, smitten in front, for very valiantly they fought, trusting to the troops above, and to their own valour. But they hurled stones down from the well-built towers, defending themselves, their tents, and their swift voyaging ships. And as snowflakes fall upon the earth, which the violent wind, having disturbed the shady clouds, pours down thick upon the fertile soil, thus poured the weapons from the hands as well of the Greeks as of the Trojans, and the helmets and bossy shields, smitten with large stones, sounded drilly around. Then indeed Asius, son of Hyrtacus, groaned, and smote both his thighs, and indignant exclaimed, "Father Jove, surely now at least thou also hast become utterly deceitful, for I did not expect that the Grecian heroes would abide our strength and invincible hands. But they, as wasps flexible in the middle, and bees which make their dwellings in a rugged path, nor quit their hollow mansion, but awaiting the huntsman, fight for their offspring, so are these unwilling to retire from the gates, though being only two, until they be either killed or taken." Thus he spake, nor did he persuade the mind of Jove, saying these things, for his soul designed to bestow glory upon Hector. In the meantime others were waging the battle at the other gates. But difficult would it be for me, as if I were a god, to enumerate all these things. For around the wall in every direction a furiously raging fire of stones was aroused, and the Greeks, although grieving, fought from necessity for their ships, and all the gods were sorrowful in their minds, as many as were allies to the Greeks in battle. But Lapithaea began the battle and contest. Then the son of Pirithous, brave Polypoetes, smote Damasus with his spear, through his brazen-cheeked helmet. Nor did the brazen casque withstand, but the brazen blade burst quite through the bone, and all the brain within was shattered. Thus he subdued him, rushing on, and afterwards he slew Pylon and Ormenus. And Leonteus, a branch of Mars, wounded Hippomachus, the son of Antimachus, with his spear, striking him at the belt. Next, drawing his sharp sword from the sheath, he, rushing through the crowd, smote Antiphates first, hand to hand, and he was dashed on his back to the ground. Then Menon and Eamenus and Orestes, all one over another, he brought to the fertile earth. Whilst they were stripping off their glittering armour, whose youths meantime, who were most numerous and most brave, and who were most eager to break down the wall, and burn the ships with fire, followed Polydamas and Hector, and they anxiously deliberated, standing at the trench. For an augury had appeared on the left to them while eager to cross, a high-flying eagle dividing the people, bearing in his talons a monstrous blood-stained serpent, alive, still panting, nor was it yet forgetful of fighting. For while holding it, writhing backwards, it wounded him upon the breast, near the neck. But he let it drop from him to the ground, afflicted with anguish, and threw it into the midst of the crowd, and flapping his wings, he fled away with the breeze of the wind. And the Trojans shuddered as they beheld the spotted serpent lying in the midst, a prodigy of aegis-bearing Jove. Then Polydamas, standing near, addressed gallant Hector. Hector, somehow or other thou art ever chiding me in the assemblies, although proposing good counsels, because it is by no means becoming for a man, being a citizen, to harangue contrary to thee, either in council or at any time in war, but ever to increase thy authority. Yet will I again speak as appears to me to be best. Let us not go about to fight with the Greeks for their ships, for thus do I think it will end, as sure as this augury has come to the Trojans desiring to cross, the high-flying eagle upon the left dividing the army, bearing in its talons a huge blood-stained serpent, still living. But presently it dropped it, before it reached its dear home, nor succeeded in carrying it to give it to its young. So we, even if we shall with great force break through the gates and wall of the Greeks, and the Greeks shall give way, not in order shall we return by the same way from the ships, for we shall leave many Trojans, whom the Greeks, fighting for the ships, will subdue with the brass. Thus indeed would a diviner, who truly kens omens in his mind, interpret, and the people would obey him. But him sternly regarding, crest-tossing Hector thus addressed, O Polydamas, thou dost not say things agreeable to me. Besides, thou knowest how to devise other counsel better than this. If, however, thou really speakest this with seriousness, then truly have the gods destroyed thy judgment from thee, who advisest me to be forgetful of the counsels of lofty thundering Jove, which he hath himself undertaken for me, and confirmed. And thou exhortest me to obey the wing-expanding birds, which I very little regard, nor do I care for them, whether they fly to the right towards the morn and the sun, or to the left towards the darkening west. But let us obey the will of mighty Jove, who rules over all mortals and immortals. There is one augury, the best, to fight for our country. Why dost thou dread the war and conflict? For although all the rest of us should perish round the ships of the Greeks, there is no fear that thou wilt perish. For thy heart is not persevering in the fight, nor warlike. But if thou darest to abstain from the combat, or dissuading, dost avert another from the battle, immediately stricken by my spear, shalt thou lose thy life. Thus then having spoken, he led the way. But they followed him with an immense clamour. Then thunder-delighting Jove raised a storm of wind from the Idaean mountains, which bore the dust directly towards the ships. Moreover, he weakened the courage of the Greeks, but bestowed glory upon the Trojans and Hector, so that, relying upon his prodigies and their own strength, they endeavoured to break through the mighty wall of the Greeks. They tore down the niched battlements of the towers, and demolished the breastworks, and with levers they upheaved the projecting buttresses, which the Greeks had planted first in the earth, as supporters of the towers. These then they tore down, and hoped to break through the wall of the Greeks. Yet did not the Greeks retire as yet from the way, but fencing up the embrasures with their ox-hide shields, they wounded from behind them the enemy coming up under the wall, and both the Ajaces ranged in every direction upon the towers, cheering on, rousing the valour of the Greeks. One they addressed with soothing, another they rebuked with harsh expressions, whomsoever they beheld totally neglectful of battle. O friends, whoever of the Greeks is excelling, or moderate, or inferior, since all men are not alike in war, now is there work for all.
And ye yourselves, I ween, know this. Let not any one be turned back towards the ships, hearing the threatener Hector, but advance onwards, and exhort each other, if perchance Olympic Jove, the darter of lightning, may grant that, having repulsed the conflict, we may pursue the enemy to the city." Thus they, shouting in front, cheered on the attack of the Greeks. But of them, as when frequent flakes of snow fall upon a winter's day, when provident Jove has begun to snow, displaying his weapons in the sight of men, and having lulled the winds, pours it down incessantly, till he covers the tops and highest peaks of the lofty mountains, and the lotus plains, and rich husbandry of men. And likewise it is poured out upon the havens and shores of the hoary sea, but the approaching waves restrain its progress, whilst all other things are covered beneath it, when the shower of Jove comes down heavily. So flew the frequent stones from those hurling on both sides, some indeed towards the Trojans, and others from the Trojans towards the Greeks. And along the whole wall a tumult arose. Yet never would the Trojans and illustrious Hector have burst open the gates of the wall, and the long bolt, had not provident Jove urged on his son Sarpedon against the Greeks, like a lion against crooked-horned oxen. But he immediately held before him his shield, equal on all sides, beautiful, brazen, plated, which the brazier indeed had plated over, and underneath had sewed together thick bulls' hides, with successive golden wires round its orb. He then, holding this before him, advanced, brandishing 2 spears, like a lion reared in the mountains, which hath been long in want of flesh, and whose valiant mind impels him to go even to the well-fenced fold, about to make an attempt upon the sheep. And although he there finds the shepherds keeping watch about their flocks with dogs and spears, still he cannot bear to be driven away, without having made trial of the fold. But springing in, he either carries one off, or is himself wounded among the first by a javelin from a quick hand. Thus then did his mind impel godlike Sarpedon to attack the wall, and to burst through the barriers, and instantly he addressed Glaucus, son of Hippolochus.
"Glaucus, why are we especially honoured in Lycia, both with the first seat and banquet, and with full goblets, and why do all look to us as to gods? Why do we also possess a great and beautiful enclosure of the vine-bearing and corn-bearing land on the banks of Xanthus? Now therefore it behooves us, advancing among the foremost Lycians, to stand firm, and to bear the brunt of the raging fight, so that some one of the closely armed Lycians may say, By no means inglorious do our kings govern Lycia, and eat the fat sheep, and drink the choice sweet wine, but their valour likewise is excelling, because they fight among the foremost Lycians. O dear friend, if indeed by escaping from this war we were destined to be ever free from old age, and immortal, neither would I combat myself in the van, nor send thee into the glorious battle. But now, for of a truth 10,000 fates of death press upon us, which it is not possible for a mortal to escape, or avoid. Let us on, either we shall give glory to some one, or some one to us." Thus he spake, nor did Glaucus turn aside or disobey, but both advanced straight forward, leading a numerous band of Lycians. But Menestheus, the son of Peteus, beholding them, shuddered, for they were advancing towards his company, bearing destruction. He looked round along the line of the Greeks, if he might see any of the leaders who could ward off the fight from his companions, and perceived the 2 Ajaces, insatiable of war, standing, and Teucer, lately come from his tent, near at hand. Yet was it not possible for him to be heard when shouting, so great was the din, and the crash of stricken shields, and of horsehair-crested helmets, and of the gates reached to heaven, for they had assailed all, and they, standing beside them, endeavoured to enter, bursting them open by force. But immediately he dispatched the herald Theutes to Ajax. "Go, noble Theutes, running, call Ajax, rather indeed both, for this would be by far the best of all, since in a short while heavy destruction will arise here, for so vigorously do the leaders of the Lycians press on, who even before were impetuous in the sharp contest. If however labour and contest have arisen to them here, at least let brave Telamonian Ajax come, and with him let Teucer follow, well skilled in archery." Thus he spoke, nor did the herald, having heard him, disobey, but he hastened to run along the wall of the brazen-mailed Greeks, and proceeding, he stood beside the Ajaces and immediately addressed them. "Ye Ages, leaders of the brazen-mailed Greeks, the beloved son of Jove-nourished Peteus adjures you to come thither, that ye may participate in his toil, though for a short time. Both indeed in preference, for this would be by far the best of all things, since soon will heavy destruction arise there. For so vigorously do the leaders of the Lycians press on, who even before were impetuous in the sharp contest. But if here also war and contest have arisen,
At least let brave Telamonian Ajax come alone, and with him let Teucer follow, well skilled in archery." Thus he spake, nor did mighty Telamonian Ajax disobey. Instantly he addressed to the son of Oïleus winged words: "Ajax, do thou and gallant Lycomedes standing here incite the Greeks to fight bravely, whilst I go thither, and oppose the battle. But I will return again instantly, after I shall have assisted them." Thus then having spoken, Telamonian Ajax departed, and with him went Teucer his brother, sprung from the same father. And Pandion along with them carried the bent bow of Teucer. As soon as they reached the tower of magnanimous Menesthius, going within the wall, for they came to their friends, being hard pressed, and the brave leaders and chiefs of the Lycians were mounting upon the breastworks like unto a dark whirlwind. But they engaged to fight in opposition, and a clamour arose. Telamonian Ajax first slew a man, the companion of Sarpedon, magnanimous Epicles, striking him with a rugged stone, which, mighty in size, lay highest up against a pinnacle within the wall. Not easily would a man support it with both hands, such as mortals now are, not although being very youthful. But he, raising it aloft, hurled it, and burst the four-coned helmet, and along with it crushed all the bones of the skull. But he, like unto a diver, fell from the lofty tower, and life deserted his bones. Teucer likewise with a shaft wounded Glaucus, the brave son of Hippolochus, as he was rushing on against a lofty wall in a part where he perceived his arm naked, and made him cease from combat. But he sprang back from the wall, concealing himself, that none of the Greeks might perceive him wounded, and insult him with words. Then grief came upon Sarpedon on account of Glaucus departing, as soon as he observed it, though he nevertheless was not neglectful of the contest. But he, taking aim, wounded Alcmaeon, son of Thestor, with his spear, and extracted the spear. But he, following the weapon, fell prone, and his armour, variously decked with brass, resounded upon him. Sarpedon then seizing the buttress with his sturdy hands, pulled, and it all followed entirely, but the wall was stripped away from above, and he formed a way for many. Then Ajax and Teucer aiming at him together, the one smote him with an arrow in the splendid belt of his mortal girding shield, around his breast. But Jove averted the fate from his son, that he might not be slain at the sterns of the ships. But Ajax, springing upon him, struck his shield, and pierced him quite through with his spear, and forcibly checked him eager. And then he fell back for a little from the buttress, but did not altogether retreat, because his spirit hoped to bear off glory. And turning around, he encouraged the godlike Lycians. "Lycians, why are ye thus remiss in your impetuous force? It is difficult for me, although being brave, having alone burst through, to form a way to the ships. But follow along with me, for the labour of the greater number is better." Thus he spake, and they, reverencing the exhortation of their king, pressed on with more alacrity round their counsel-giving king. And the Greeks on the other side strengthened their phalanxes within the wall, because a great work presented itself to them. For neither could the gallant Lycians, bursting through the wall of the Greeks, make their way to the ships, nor could the warlike Greeks repulse the Lycians from the wall, since first they approached it. But as two men, holding measures in their hands, dispute in a common field, concerning their boundaries, who in a small space contend for their equitable right, thus did the buttresses separate these warriors, and for them each smote the well-rounded ox-hide shields around each other's breasts, and the light bucklers of each other. And many were wounded upon the body with the merciless brass, whether the back of any combatant, averted, was laid bare, and many right through the shield itself. Everywhere the towers and buttresses were sprinkled on both sides with the blood of heroes, from the Trojans and the Greeks. Yet not even thus could they cause a flight of the Greeks, but they held themselves, as a just woman who labours with her hands does the scales, who, poising both the weight and the wool, draws them on either side to equalize them, that she may procure a scanty pittance for the support of her children. Thus equally was their battle and war extended, before the time when Jove gave superior glory to Hector, the son of Priam, who first leaped within the wall of the Greeks, and shouted with a penetrating voice, calling out to the Trojans, "Push on, ye horse-breaking Trojans, burst through the wall of the Greeks, and hurl the fiercely blazing fire against the ships." Thus he spake, cheering them on, but they all heard him with their ears, and rushed against the wall in great numbers, and then mounted the battlements, carrying their pointed spears. But Hector, seizing it, took up a stone which stood before the gates, widening out at the base, but sharp above, which two men, the strongest of the people, such as mortals now are, could not easily raise from the ground upon a waggon. He, however, brandished it easily and alone, because the son of wise Saturn had rendered it light to him. As when a shepherd without difficulty carries the fleece of a male sheep, taking it in either hand, and but a small weight oppresses him, so Hector, raising the stone, bore it right against the beams which strengthened the closely jointed gates, double and lofty. But 2 crossbars secured them within, and 1 key fitted them. But advancing, he stood very near, and exerting his strength, struck them in the middle, standing with his legs wide asunder, that the blow of the weapon might not be weak. And he tore away both hinges, and the stone fell within a great weight, and the gates crashed around, nor did the bars withstand it. But the beams were rent asunder in different directions by the impulse of the stone. There illustrious Hector rushed in aspect like unto the dreadful night, and he glittered in terrible brass, with which he was girt around his body. And he held 2 spears in his hands, nor could any one opposing restrain him, except the gods, after he had leaped within the gates. But his eyes gleamed with fire. And turning to the crowd, he cheered on the Trojans to ascend the wall, and they obeyed him encouraging. Straightway indeed some crossed the wall, and others were poured in through the well-wrought gates, but the Greeks were routed towards the hollow barks, and an unyielding tumult ensued. End of Book the 12th. Section 13, Book the 13th. Argument. Neptune engages on the Grecian side, and the battle proceeds. Deiphobus is repulsed by Meriones, Teucer kills Imbrius, and Hector Amphimachus. Neptune, assuming the likeness of Thoas, exhorts Idomeneus, who goes forth with Meriones to battle, when the former slays Othryoneus and Asius. Deiphobus attacks Idomeneus, but misses him, and slays Hypsenor. Idomeneus slays Alcathous, over whose body a sharp contest ensues. But after Jove then had brought the Trojans and Hector near the ships, he left them to endure labour and toil at them incessantly. But he himself turned back his shining eyes apart, looking towards the land of the equestrian Thracians, and the close-fighting Mysians, and the illustrious Hippomolgi, milk-nourished, simple in living, and most just men. But to Troy he no longer now turned his bright eyes, for he did not suppose in his mind that any one of the mortals going would aid either the Trojans or the Greeks. Nor did King Neptune keep a vain watch, for he sat aloft upon the highest summit of the woody Thracian Samos, admiring the war and the battle. For from thence all Ida was visible, and the city of Priam was visible, and the ships of the Greeks. Then coming out of the sea he sat down, and pitied the Greeks, subdued by the Trojans, and was very indignant with Jove. But presently he descended down from the rugged mountain, rapidly advancing on foot, and the high hills and woods trembled beneath the immortal feet of Neptune advancing. Thrice indeed he strode, advancing, and with the 4th step he reached Aegea, his destined goal. There distinguished mansions, golden, glittering, ever incorruptible, were erected to him in the depths of the sea. Coming thither, he yoked beneath his chariot the brazen-footed steeds, swiftly flying, crested with golden manes. But he himself placed gold around his person, took his golden lash, well wrought, and descended his chariot. He proceeded to drive over the billows, and the monsters of the deep sported beneath him on all sides from their recesses, nor were ignorant of their king. For joy the sea departed, and they flew very rapidly, nor was the brazen axle moist beneath. And his well-bounding steeds bore him to the ships of the Greeks. Now there is an ample cave in the recesses of the deep sea, between Tenedos and rugged Imbrus. There earth-shaking Neptune stopped his horses, loosing them from the chariot, and cast beside them ambrosial fodder to eat. And round their feet he threw golden fetters, irrefragable, indissoluble, that they might there steadily await their king returning. But he departed towards the army of the Greeks. The Trojans, however, in crowds, like unto a flame or a whirlwind, followed Hector, the son of Priam, with insatiable ardour, shouting loudly and exclaiming, for they hoped to capture the ships of the Greeks and slay all the Greeks beside them. But earth-ruling, earth-shaking Neptune, coming from the deep sea, aroused the Greeks, assimilating his person and indefatigable voice to Calchas. The Ajaces he first addressed, though themselves were earnest. Ye Ajaces, ye indeed, mindful of valour, not of direful flight, will preserve the people of the Greeks. For in any other place indeed I do not dread the audacious hands of the Trojans, who in great numbers have surmounted the great wall, because the well-grieved Greeks will sustain them all. But in that place I grievously fear lest we suffer anything, where infuriated Hector, like unto a flame, leads on who boasts to be the son of almighty Jove. But may some of the gods thus put it in your minds, that ye stand firmly yourselves, and exhort others. Thus may ye drive him, although impetuous, from the swift-sailing ships, even if Jove himself excites him. He said, and earth-ruling Neptune, striking both with his sceptre, filled them with violent might, and made their limbs light and their feet and hands above. But he, like as a swift-winged hawk is impelled to fly, which, lifted up from a rugged lofty rock, has hastened to pursue another bird over the plain, so darted earth-shaking Neptune from them. But fleet Ajax, the son of Oileus, recognized him first of the two, and straightway addressed Ajax, the son of Telamon. "O Ajax, since some one of the gods who possesses Olympus, likening himself to the soothsayer, exhorts us to fight beside the ships, neither is this Calchas the prophesying augur, for I readily recognize the traces of his feet and legs when departing. For thus the gods are easily distinguished. Even to myself, the soul within my bosom is more incited to war and to fight, and my feet beneath and hands above eagerly desire it." But him Telamonian Ajax answering addressed, "So also to me are my strong hands upon my spear eager, and my courage is aroused, and I am hurried along by both my feet under me. And I eagerly long, even alone, to combat with Hector, the son of Priam, insatiably raging." Thus they addressed these words to each other, joyful in a desire of battle, which the god had infused into their minds. In the meanwhile the earth-ruler Neptune aroused the Achaeans in the rear, who were recruiting their spirit at the swift ships, whose limbs were at the same time relaxed with toilsome labour, and grief was arising in their minds, beholding the Trojans, who with a tumult had surmounted the vast wall. But beholding them, they poured forth tears from beneath their eyebrows, for they expected not to escape destruction. But the earth-shaker, intervening, easily aroused the brave Phalanxes. To Teucer and Laius he first came, exhorting them, and to the hero Peneleus and Thoas, and Epirus, and to Meriones and Antilochus skilful in war. These he encouraging spoke winged words. "O shame! Argives, young men, I trust that our ships will be preserved by your fighting. But if ye be remiss in the destructive battle, the day is now come for us to be subdued by the Trojans. Ye gods, surely I behold with my eyes a great marvel, terrible, which I never expected would be brought to pass, that the Trojans should approach our ships, who formerly like unto timid stags, which through the wood are the prey of lynxes, pards, and wolves, foolishly straying about, weak, nor fit for combat, so the Trojans formerly would not stand even for a little against the might and prowess of the Greeks. But now, far away from the city, they combat at the hollow ships, through the perverseness of our general and the indifference of the troops, who, disputing with him, are unwilling to defend the swift ships, but are slain among them. Yet although in reality the hero, the son of Atreus, wide-ruling Agamemnon, be altogether in fault, in that he hath dishonoured the swift-footed son of Peleus, still it is by no means our duty to be remiss in battle, but let us sooner repair the mischief. The minds of the brave are easily appeased. But they by no means honourably remit your impetuous valour, being all the bravest in the army. I indeed would not quarrel with a band who should desist from combat, being unwarlike. But with you I am indignant from my heart. O soft ones, surely will ye soon create some greater evil by this inertness. But do each of you in his mind ponder on the shame and reproach, for certainly a mighty contest hath arisen. Now indeed brave Hector, going good in the din of war, combats at the ships, and hath burst through the gates and the long bar. Thus then Neptune exhorting aroused the Greeks. But round the two Ajaces firm phalanxes stood, which not even Mars, coming against them, would have found fault with, nor Minerva, the confounder of armies. For the bravest selected awaited the Trojans and noble Hector, knitting spear with spear, shield with shield, one upon another, so that shield pressed upon shield, helmet upon helmet, and man upon man. And the horse-haired helmets of them, nodding, touched each other with their splendid ridges, so closely stood they to one another, and spears in the act of being hurled were brandishing from their daring hands, whilst they wished to go straight against the enemy, and were eager to fight. But the combined Trojans first made the attack, and impetuous Hector first rushed against them, as a destructively rolling stone from a rock, which a wintry torrent drives down the brow, having burst with a mighty shower the stays of the rugged rock, and bounding along it rolls, and the forest resounds beneath it. But straightway it runs on interruptedly until it reach the plain, but then it rolls no longer, though impelled. So Hector for a while threatened that he would easily come as far as the sea, to the tents and ships of the Greeks, slaughtering. But when now he met the firm phalanxes, he stopped, being come into close contact, and the sons of the Greeks opposing repulsed him from them, striking him with their swords and two-edged spears. But retiring, he was compelled to withdraw, and he cried out, shouting audibly to the Trojans, "Ye Trojans and Lycians, and close-fighting Dardanians, stand firm! Not long will the Greeks withstand me, although they have drawn themselves up in very dense array. But I conceive they will retire from my spear, if in truth the most powerful of the gods, the high-thundering husband of Juno, hath urged me on." So saying, he aroused the might and courage of each. But Deïphobus, the son of Priam, walked amongst them, high-minded, and he held his shield equal on all sides before him, proceeding with light step, and advancing under protection of his shield. Then Meriones took aim with his shining spear, and struck him, nor did he miss, upon the bull's hide shield, equal on all sides, which he did not pierce. For the long spear far before was broken at the socket. But Deïphobus held his bull's hide shield far from him, for he dreaded in his mind the spear of warlike Meriones. But that hero fell back into the column of his companions, for he was grievously enraged on both accounts, both for the loss of the victory, and of the spear which he had broken. Accordingly he proceeded to pass by the tents and ships of the Greeks, to bring a long spear which had been left in his tent, whilst the others fought, and a mighty tumult arose. Then Telamonian Teucer first slew a hero, the warrior Imbrius, son of Mentor, rich in steeds, and he dwelt at Pedaeum before the sons of the Greeks arrived, and had married Medesicaste, the illegitimate daughter of Priam. But when the equally plied ships of the Greeks arrived, he came back to Ilium, and excelled among the Trojans, and dwelt with Priam, who honoured him equally with his sons. Him the son of Telamon smote under the ear with his long javelin, and plucked out the spear, but he indeed fell like an ash, which on the summit of a mountain, conspicuous from afar, cut down with a brazen axe, strews its tender foliage on the earth. Thus he fell, and his armour, variegated with brass, rang about him. Then Teucer rushed on, eager to strip him of his armour, but Hector hurled his shining spear at him, hastening. He, however, seeing it from the opposite side, avoided by a small space the brazen spear. And Hector wounded with his javelin on the breast Amphimachus, son of Cteus, the son of Actor, advancing to the battle. And falling he gave a crash, and his arms rang upon him. Then Hector rushed to tear from the head of magnanimous Amphimachus the helmet fitted to his temples. But Ajax hurled with his shining spear at Hector, rushing on. Yet it never reached his body, for he was protected all over with terrible brass. But he smote him upon the boss of the shield, and repulsed him with great violence. And he retired from both bodies, and the Greeks drew them away. Then Stichius and noble Menesthius, the leaders of the Athenians, carried Amphimachus to the army of the Greeks. But the two Ajaces, eager for impetuous combat, carried Imbrius. As two lions bear a goat through the thick corpse wood, snatching it from the sharp-toothed dogs, holding it high above the earth in their jaws, so the two warriors, the Ajaces, holding him, Imbrius, aloft, stripped off his armour. But the son of Oileus, enraged on account of Amphimachus, severed his head from his tender neck, and sent it rolling like a ball through the crowd. But it fell before the feet of Hector in the dust. Then indeed was Neptune grieved at heart for his grandson, slain in the grievous fight, and he proceeded to go along the tents and ships of the Greeks, exhorting the Greeks, and preparing disasters for the Trojans. But spear-renowned Idomeneus then met him, returning from a companion who had lately come to him from the battle, wounded in the ham with a sharp brass, whom his comrades had carried in, and he, having given directions to the surgeons, was returning from his tent, for he still desired to participate in the fight. Him King Neptune addressed, assimilating himself as to his voice to Thais, son of Andræmon, who governed the Ætolians throughout all Pleuron and lofty Calydon, and who was honoured by the people as a god. "Idomeneus, thou counsellor of the Cretans, where indeed are the threats gone, with which the sons of the Greeks threatened the Trojans?" Whom again in turn Idomeneus, the leaders of the Cretans, addressed. "No man, O Theos, as far as I know, is at present to blame, for we are all skilled in warring. Neither does disheartening fear detain any one, nor does any one, yielding to sloth, shirk evil strife. But thus doubtless it will be agreeable to the all-powerful son of Saturn, that here, far away from Argos, the Greeks shall perish inglorious. But Thoas, for formerly thou wast warlike, and urged on others when thou didst behold them negligent, so now desist not thyself, but exhort each man." But him earth-shaking Neptune then answered, "Never may that man, O Idomeneus, return from Troy, but let him here be the sport of the dogs, whosoever voluntarily this day shall relax from fighting. But come, taking up arms, advance hither. For it behooves us to hasten these things, if we may be of any service, although but two. For useful is the valour of men, even the very pusillanimous if combined, whereas we both understand how to fight even with the brave." So saying, the god departed again to the toil of heroes. But Idomeneus, when now he had reached his well-made tent, put on his rich armour around his body, and seized 2 spears, and hastened to go, like unto the lightning, which the son of Saturn, seizing in his hand, brandishes from glittering Olympus, showing a sign to mortals. And brilliant are its rays. So shone the brass around the breast of him running. Then Meriones, his good attendant, met him yet near the tent, for he was going to fetch a brazen spear, and the strength of Idomeneus addressed him. "Meriones, son of Molus, swift of foot, dearest of my companions, why comest thou thus, quitting the war and the contest? Art thou at all wounded, and does the point of a spear afflict thee? Or comest thou to me on my message? For I myself am not desirous to sit within my tent, but to fight." But him prudent Meriones in turn answered, "Idomeneus, thou counsellor of the brazen-mailed Cretans, I come, if there be any spear left within thy tents, to take it, because I indeed have broken that which I formerly had, having struck the shield of ferocious Deïphobus." Whom again in turn Idomeneus, leader of the Cretans, addressed, "Thou wilt find, if thou desirest to select from them, 21 spears standing in my tent against the shining walls, which I have taken from the slain Trojans. For I affirm that I do not fight with hostile men, standing at a distance from them. Hence I have both spears, and bossy shields, and helmets, and corslets, brightly polished." But him again prudent Meriones addressed in turn, "At my tent also and black ship are there many spoils of the Trojans, but they are not near, so that I might take them. For neither do I conceive that I am forgetful of valour, but I stand among the foremost in glory-giving battle, whenever the contest of war has arisen. I am rather unobserved, perhaps, when fighting by some other of the brazen-mailed Greeks, but I think that thou knowest me." Whom again Idomeneus, leader of the Cretans, addressed in turn, "I know what thou art as to valour. What necessity is there for thee to enumerate these things? For if now all we the bravest at the ship should be selected for an ambuscade, where the courage of men is especially distinguished, where both the coward as well as the brave man is made apparent, for the complexion of the coward on the one hand is changed from this to that, nor is his heart calm within his bosom, so that he can rest without trembling, but he shifts his position, and sits upon both his feet, whilst his heart greatly palpitates within his breast, as he is expecting death, and the chattering of his teeth arises. But neither is the complexion of the brave man changed, nor is he at all disturbed, after he first sits down in the ambush of heroes, but he burns to be mingled with all haste in direful fight. No one, in that case, would find fault with thy courage and might. For if labouring in the battle thou wert wounded from a distance, or smitten in close fight, the weapon would not fall upon thy neck behind, nor upon thy back, but it would pierce through either thy breast or thy stomach as thou wast rushing forward amid the conflict of foremost combatants. But come, no longer let us speak of these things, standing like infatuated persons, lest perhaps some one chides us inordinately, but do thou, going to the tent, take a strong spear." Thus he spake. And Meriones, equal to swift Mars, quickly took from the tent a brazen spear, and he went along with Idomeneus, very eager for war. But as man-destroying Mars enters the battle, with whom Terror, his dear son, at the same time powerful and undismayed, follows, who strikes fear into the warrior even of resolute soul, these indeed are armed from Thrace, along with the Ephyri, or with the magnanimous Phlegians. Neither do they hear both, but they give glory to one or the other. So Meriones and Idomeneus, leaders of heroes, advanced to battle, equipped with helmets of glittering brass. And Meriones first addressed him in these words, "Son of Deucalion, where dost thou meditate to enter the throng? To the right of all the army, or at the centre, or upon the left? Since nowhere else in the battle do I conceive that the long-haired Greeks so much require support." But him Idomeneus, the leader of the Cretans, in turn addressed, "Among the centre ships indeed there are others to aid them, both the Ajaces and Teucer, who is the most skilful of the Greeks in archery, and brave also in standing fight, who will sufficiently harass even to satiety Hector, the son of Priam, although most urgent of battle, and although being very gallant. Hard will it be for him, although very desirous of fighting, having overpowered their strength and invincible hands, to fire the ships, unless the son of Saturn himself cast a flaming torch upon the swift ships. Nor indeed will mighty Telamonian Ajax yield to any man who may be immortal, and who may eat the fruit of Ceres, who is vulnerable by brass and by large stones. Not even to warlike Achilles would he give way, at least in standing fight. But in speed he is by no means able to contend with him. Guide us, therefore, to the left of the army, that we may quickly know whether we shall afford glory to any one, or any one to us." Thus he spoke. But Meriones, equal to rapid Mars, began to proceed, until he came to that part of the army whither he had ordained him. But they, when they beheld Idomeneus like unto a flame in might, both him and his attendant in variously wrought armour, they all, exhorting one another along the crowd, advanced against him, and an equal contest arose at the sterns of their ships. And as when storms sweep along, driven by the shrill wind, on a day when the dust around the roads is very abundant, and they at the same time raise up a large cloud of dust, so came on the battle of these together, and they were eager in their minds to slaughter one another throughout the throng with the sharp brass. And the mortal-destroying combat bristles with the long spears which they held, flesh-rending, and the brazen splendour from the gleaming helmets, the newly burnished corslets, and the shining shields coming together dazzled their eyes. Very brave-hearted would he be who, when beholding their toil, could have rejoiced, and would not be disturbed. But the two powerful sons of Saturn, favouring different sides, planned grievous toils for the heroes. On the one hand, Jove willed victory to the Trojans, and to Hector, glorifying swift-footed Achilles. Yet he desired not entirely to destroy the Grecian people before Ilium, but was honouring Thetis and her magnanimous son. On the other hand, Neptune, coming amongst them, encouraged the Greeks, having secretly emerged from the hoary deep. For he grieved that they should be subdued by the Trojans, and he was greatly indignant with Jove. The same race indeed was to both, and the same lineage, but Jove was born first, and knew more. For this reason Neptune avoided aiding them openly, but always kept privately inciting them through the army, assimilated to a man. They indeed alternately stretched over both the cord of vehement contest and equally destructive war, irrefragable and indissoluble, which relaxed the knees of many. Then although half-hoary Idomeneus, encouraging the Greeks, rushing upon the Trojans, created night, for he slew Orythionius, who had come from Cabesus, staying within Priam's house. He had lately come after the rumour of the war, and demanded Cassandra, the most beautiful in form of the daughters of Priam, without a dowry, and he had promised a mighty deed to repulse in spite of themselves the sons of the Greeks from Troy. But to him aged Priam had promised her, and pledged himself to give her. Therefore he fought, trusting in these promises. But Idomeneus took aim at him with his shining spear, and hurling it struck him, strutting proudly. Nor did the brazen corslet which he wore resist it, but he fixed it in the middle of his stomach, and falling he gave a crash, and the other boasted and said, "Othryoneus! Above all men indeed do I praise thee, if thou wilt now in truth accomplish all which thou hast undertaken for Dardanian Priam. But he also promised thee his daughter. We likewise, promising these things, will accomplish them to thee. We will give thee the most beautiful in form of the daughters of the son of Atreus to wed, bringing her from Argos, if along with us thou wilt destroy the well-inhabited city of Ilium. But follow, that we may treat with thee respecting the marriage of sea-traversing ships, since we are by no means bad brothers-in-law." So saying, the hero Idomeneus dragged him by the foot through the brisk battle. But to him Asius came as an avenger, on foot, before his steeds, which his attendant charioteer always kept breathing over his shoulders, and in his mind he longed to strike Idomeneus. But Idomeneus, anticipating him, smote him with his spear in the throat, below the chin, and drove the brass quite through. And he fell as when some oak falls, or white poplar, or towering pine, which timber-workers have cut down upon the mountains with lately whetted axes, to become ship-timber. So he lay, stretched out before his horses and chariot, gnashing his teeth, grasping the bloody dust. But the charioteer was deprived of the senses which he previously had, nor dared he turn back the horses that he might escape from the hands of the enemy. But him warlike Antilochus, striking, transfixed in the middle with his spear, nor did the brazen corslet which he wore resist, but he fixed it in the centre of his stomach. Then panting he fell from the well-made chariot seat, and Antilochus, the son of magnanimous Nestor, drove away the horses from the Trojans to the well-armed Greeks. But Deiphobus, enraged on account of Asius, drew very near to Idomeneus, and hurled with his shining spear. Idomeneus, however, having perceived it opposite, avoided the brazen spear, for he was concealed behind his shield, equal on all sides, which he bore, constructed of the hides of bulls, and glittering brass, fitted with 2 handles. Behind this he collected himself entirely, and the brazen spear flew over him. But the shield returned a dry sound, the spear grazing it obliquely. Yet he, Deiphobus, sent it not in vain from his heavy hand, but he struck Hypsenor, son of Hippasus, the shepherd of the people, upon the liver below the breast, and straightway relaxed his knees under him. But Deiphobus vainly boasted over him, loudly exclaiming, "Surely not avenged lies Asius. I rather think that he will rejoice in his mind, though going into the strong-gated, massy dwelling of Hades, since I have given him a guide." Thus he spoke, but grief came upon the Greeks at his boasting, and it particularly agitated the mind of warlike Antilochus. Yet grieved as he was, he neglected not his companion, but running he protected him, and covered him over with his shield. Him then his two dear companions, Mecisteus, son of Achaeus, and noble Alastor supporting, bore to the hollow ships, deeply groaning. In the meantime Idomeneus ceased not his mighty valour, but always burned either to cover some of the Trojans with pitchy night, or himself to fall with a crash, repelling destruction from the Greeks. Then the hero Alcathous, the beloved son of Acetus, and he was a son-in-law of Anchises, for he had married Hippodamia, the eldest of his daughters, whom their father and venerable mother loved from their hearts, whilst in their home, because she excelled all of her age in beauty, in accomplishments, and prudence, for which reason also the most distinguished man in wide Troy had wedded her. Him Neptune subdued under Idomeneus, having dimmed his shining eyes, and fettered his fair limbs. For he was able neither to fly back nor to turn aside, but him standing motionless like a pillar or lofty branching tree, the hero Idomeneus wounded with his spear in the middle of his breast, and burst the brazen coat around him, which formerly warded off destruction from his body. But then it sent forth a dry sound, severed by the spear. Falling he gave a crash, and the spear was fixed in his heart, which palpitating shook even the extremity of the spear, and there at length the impetuous Mars spent its force. But Idomeneus boasted prodigiously over him, loudly exclaiming, "Deiphobus, do we judge rightly that it is a fair return, that 3 should be slain for 1, since thus thou boastest? But do thou thyself also, wretch, stand against me, that thou mayest know of what nature I am, who have come hither the offspring of Jove, who first begat Minos, the guardian of Crete. Minos again begat Deucalion, his blameless son, and Deucalion begat me, king over many men in wide Crete. But now the ships have brought me hither, an evil both to thee, and to thy father, and the other Trojans." Thus he spoke. But Deiphobus hesitated between two opinions, whether falling back, he should join to himself some one of the magnanimous Trojans, or make trial although alone. But to him, thus deliberating, it appeared preferable to go in search of Æneas, whom he found standing at the rear of the army, for he was ever indignant with noble Priam, because he by no means honoured him, though being valiant among heroes. And standing near, he addressed to him winged words. "Æneas, thou counsellor of the Trojans, now does it greatly behoove thee to aid thy brother-in-law, if indeed any regard reaches thee. But follow, let us bring aid to Alcathous, who being thy brother-in-law, nourished thee whilst very young in his palace, and whom spear-famed Idomeneus hath slain." Thus he spoke, and roused the courage in his breast, and he, greatly desirous of battle, went to meet Idomeneus. Yet fear seized not Idomeneus like a tender boy, but he stood still, like a boar in the mountains, confident in his prowess, and who abides the mighty din of men, advancing against him in a desert place, and bristles up his back. His eyes too gleam with fire, and he whets his teeth, eager to keep at bay both dogs and men. So spear-renowned Idomeneus awaited Æneas, swift in the battle din, coming against him, nor retired. But he shouted to his companions, looking to Ascapus, and Aphareus, and Epirus, and Meriones, and Antilochus, skilful in fight. Exhorting these, he addressed to them winged words. "Hither, my friends, and aid me alone, for I greatly dread swift-footed Æneas rushing on, who is coming upon thee, who is very powerful to slay men in battle, and possesses the bloom of youth, which is the greatest strength. For if we were of the same age with the spirit that I now possess, quickly would either he bear off great glory, or I would." Thus he spoke. But they all, having one determination in their minds, stood near him, inclining their shields upon their shoulders. Æneas, on the other hand, animated his companions, looking towards Deiphobus, Paris, and noble Agenor, who together with himself were leaders of the Trojans. These also the people followed, as sheep follow from their pasture after the ram in order to drink, and the shepherd then is rejoiced in his mind. So was the soul of Æneas gladdened in his breast, when he beheld a body of troops following himself. These therefore engaged in close fight round Alcathous with long spears, whilst the brass resounded horribly on the breasts of them, aiming at each other through the crowd. But two warlike men, conspicuous among the rest, Æneas and Idomeneus, equal to Mars, longed to lacerate each other's flesh with the ruthless brass. But Æneas first hurled his javelin at Idomeneus. But he, perceiving it opposite, avoided the brazen spear, and the spear of Æneas sank quivering into the earth, for it fled in vain from his sturdy hand. Idomeneus next smote Oenomus in the middle of the stomach, and the spear burst the cavity of his corslet, and penetrating drank his entrails through. But falling amid the dust, he grasped the earth with the hollow of his hand. Then Idomeneus plucked out the long spear from his body, but was unable to tear off the other rich armour from his shoulders, for he was pressed hard by weapons. For no longer were the sinews of his feet firm as he rushed, either to hasten on after his own dart, or avoid that of another. Wherefore also in standing fight he warded off the fatal day, nor did his feet any longer bear him with ease in retreating from the battle. But against him, gradually retiring, Deïphobus took aim with his glittering spear, for he ever had a rooted hatred towards him. But then too he missed, and struck with his javelin Ascalaphus, the son of Mars, and drove the stout spear through his shoulder, and tailing amidst the dust, he grasped the earth with his hand. Not yet, however, had loudly roaring, impetuous Mars heard that his son had fallen in the violent fight. But he sat upon the summit of Olympus, beneath golden clouds, excluded from the battle by the will of Jove, where also the other immortal gods were restrained from the war. In the meantime they engaged in close fight around Ascalaphus. Deïphobus indeed tore the shining helmet from Ascalaphus, and Meriones, equal to swift Mars, springing upon him, smote him with his spear in the arm, and the crested casque, falling from his hand, rang upon the earth. Immediately Meriones, leaping upon him like a vulture, plucked out the tough spear from the lower part of his arm, and retired back again into the crowd of his comrades. But him Polites, his own brother, throwing his hands round his waist, carried out of the dread-sounding battle, till he reached his fleet steeds, which awaited him in the rear of the combat and the war, having both a charioteer and a variegated car, which then carried him towards the city, groaning heavily and afflicted, and the blood flowed from his recently wounded hand. But the others kept fighting, and an unquenchable clamour arose. Then Æneas, rushing upon Aphareus, the son of Caletor, smote him with his sharp spear upon the throat when turned towards him, and his head was bent to one side, and then his shield clung to him, and his helmet. And around him life-destroying death was spread. Antilochus, however, observing Thoas turning round, attacking, wounded him, and cut away all the vein which running quite along the back reaches to the neck. All this he cut off, but he fell back on his back in the dust, stretching out both hands to his beloved companions. Then Antilochus sprang upon him, and stripped the armour from his shoulders, looking around. But the Trojans, surrounding him, struck his wide and ornamented shield with their darts, nor were they able to graze with the dire brass the tender body of Antilochus within it, because earth-shaking Neptune protected the son of Nestor all round, even amongst many weapons. For never indeed was he apart from the enemy, but he turned himself about among them. Nor did he hold his spear without motion, but continually moving, it was whirled about, and he prepared within his mind either to hurl it at some one afar off, or to rush upon some one close at hand. But meditating these things amid the throng, he escaped not the notice of Adamas, the son of Asius, who smote him in the middle of his shield with the sharp brass, attacking him in close combat. But azure-haired Neptune weakened the spear, grudging him the life of Antilochus. Part of it remained there like a stake burned in the fire, in the shield of Antilochus, and the other half lay upon the ground, whilst he gave backwards into the crowd of his companions, shunning death. Meriones, however, following him, departing, smote him with his spear between the private parts and the navel, where a wound is particularly painful to miserable mortals. There he fixed the spear in him, and he falling, struggling, panting around the spear, as an ox when cowherds in mountains, forcibly binding him with twisted cords, lead him away unwilling. So he wounded, throbbed though but for a short time, and not very long, until the hero Meriones coming near plucked the spear from his body, and darkness veiled his eyes. But Helenus, close at hand, struck Deipyrus upon the temple with his huge Thracian sword, and cut away the three-coned helmet, which being dashed off, fell upon the ground, and some one of the combating Greeks lifted it up, having rolled between his feet, whilst dim night enveloped his eyes. Then grief seized the son of Atreus, Menelaus, brave in the din of battle, and he advanced, threatening the hero, King Helenus, brandishing his sharp spear, whilst the other drew the horn of his bow. Together then they darted, the one eager to launch his fir-tree spear, and the other an arrow from the string. Then indeed the son of Priam smote him in the breast with an arrow, on the cavity of the corslet, but the bitter shaft rebounded, as when from the broad winnowing fan in a large threshing floor the black-coated beans or vetches leap at the shrill blast, and the force of the winnower. So strongly repulsed by the corslet of glorious Menelaus, the bitter arrow flew afar. But Menelaus, the son of Atreus, brave in the din of battle, smote him upon the hand which held his well-polished bow. And in the bow the brazen spear was fixed from the opposite side, through his hand. Then he retired back into the crowd of his companions, avoiding death, hanging down his hand at his side. But the ashen spear was trailed along with him. And then magnanimous Agenor extracted it from his hand, and bound the hand itself sling-ways in well-twisted sheep's wool, which his attendant carried for the shepherd of the people.
But Pisander went direct against glorious Menelaus, because evil fate led him towards the end of death, to be subdued by thee, O Menelaus, in the dire battle. When therefore they were near, advancing against each other, the son of Atreus indeed missed, and his spear was turned aside from him. But Pisander smote the shield of glorious Menelaus, nor could he drive the spear quite through, because the broad shield kept it off, and the spear was broken at the extremity. Still he rejoiced in his mind, and hoped for victory. The son of Atreus, however, drawing his silver-studded sword, sprang upon Pisander, but he drew from beneath his shield a handsome battle-axe of well-wrought brass, fixed upon either side of an olive handle, long, well-polished, and at once they struck each other. Then he, Pisander, cut away the cone of the helmet, thick with horsehair, under the very crest, but Menelaus smote him, approaching upon the forehead, above the root of the nose. And the bones crashed, and his blood-stained eyes fell at his feet upon the ground in the dust. And falling he writhed. Then he, Menelaus, placing his heel upon his breast, despoiled him of his armour, and boasting spoke this speech: Thus, then, shall ye abandon the ships of the Greeks, who possess swift steeds, ye treaty-breaking Trojans, insatiate of dire battle? Of other injury and disgrace ye indeed lack nothing with which ye have injured me, vile dogs, nor have ye at all dreaded in your minds the heavy wrath of high-thundering hospitable Jove, who will yet destroy for you your lofty city. Ye who unprovoked departed, carrying off my virgin spouse, and much wealth, after ye had been hospitably received by her. Now again do ye eagerly desire to hurl destructive fire upon the sea-traversing ships, and to slay the Grecian heroes. But ye shall yet be restrained, impetuous as ye be, from war. O Father Jove, assuredly they say that thou excellest all others, men and gods, in prudence, yet from thee do all these things proceed. How much dost thou gratify these insolent Trojan men, whose violence is ever pernicious, and who cannot be satisfied with war, equally destructive to all? Of all things is there satiety, of sleep, of love, of sweet singing, and of faultless dancing, with which one would much more readily satisfy his desire than with war. But the Trojans are insatiate of battle. So saying, having stripped the bloody armour from the body, illustrious Menelaus gave it to his companions, whilst he, advancing, was again mixed with the foremost combatants. Then Harpalion, the son of King Pylaemenes, who had then followed his dear father to wage war at Troy, leaped upon him, nor returned he back to his native land. He it was who then, close at hand, struck the middle of Atrides' shield with his lance, nor was he able to drive it quite through the brass, but he retired back into the crowd of his companions, avoiding death, looking around on all sides, lest anyone should touch his body with a spear. Meriones, however, shot a brazen-pointed arrow at him retreating, and struck him upon the right hip, and the arrow penetrated to the other side, through the bladder below the bone. Sinking down, therefore, in the same place, breathing out his life in the arms of his beloved companions, like a worm he lay stretched upon the ground, whilst his black blood flowed, and moistened the earth. Around him the magnanimous Paphlagonians were employed, and lifting him up upon a chariot, they bore him to sacred Ilium, grieving. And with them went his father, shedding tears, but no vengeance was taken for his dead son. But Paris was greatly enraged in his soul on account of his being slain, for he had been his guest among many Paphlagonians. Wherefore, enraged on his account, he sent forth a brazen arrow. Now there was one Euchaenor, son of the diviner Polides, wealthy and brave, inhabiting a dwelling at Corinth, who, well knowing his fatal destiny, had arrived in a ship. For often had Polides, good old man, told him that he would perish in his halls of a grievous disease, or be subdued by the Trojans among the ships of the Greeks. Wherefore he avoided at once the severe moct of the Achaeans, and odious disease, that he might not suffer sorrows in his mind. Him Paris smote below the jaw and the ear, and his spirit quickly departed from his members, and hateful darkness seized him. Thus indeed they fought like unto a burning fire. But Hector, dear to Jove, had not learned, nor knew at all how at the left of the ships his people were being slaughtered by the Greeks, for the victory was on the point of being the Grecians'.
So much did earth-shaking Neptune encourage the Greeks, and moreover himself assisted with his strength. But he, Hector, pressed on where first he had sprung within the gates and walls, breaking the thick ranks of the shielded Greeks. There were the ships of Ajax and Protesilaus drawn up upon the shore of the hoary sea, but above them the wall was built very low. There themselves and their horses were most impetuous in the combat. There the Boeotians and long-robed Ionians, the Locrians, the Pythians, and the illustrious Epeans restrained him from the ships, fiercely rushing on, but were unable to drive away from them noble Hector, like unto a flame. The chosen men of the Athenians stood in the van, among whom Menesthius, son of Peteus, had the command, and with him followed Phetus, Stichius, and brave Bias, Meges, the son of Phaeus, Amphion and Dracius led the Epeans, and over the Pythians were Medon and Podarches, steady in fight. Medon was indeed the spurious offspring of godlike Oileus, and the brother of Ajax, but he dwelt at Phylace, away from his native country, having slain a man, the brother of his stepmother Areopis, whom Oileus had married. But the other was a son of Iphiclus, of Phylace. These in arms before the magnanimous Pythians fought among the Boeotians, defending the ships. But Ajax, the swift son of Oileus, never separated from Telamonian Ajax, not even for a little time. But as in a fallow field 2 black bullocks possessing equal spirit draw a well-joined plough, but meanwhile copious sweat breaks forth around the roots of their horns, and them the well-polished yoke alone separates on either side, advancing along the furrows, and the plough cuts up the bottom of the soil, so they twain joined together stood very near to each other. And then many and brave troops followed the son of Telamon as companions, who received from him his shield, whenever fatigue and sweat came upon his limbs. But the Locrians followed not the great-souled son of Oilus, for their heart remained not firm to them in the standing fight, because they had not brazen helmets crested with horsehair, nor had they well-orbed shields and ashen spears. But they followed along with him to Ilium, trusting in the bows and the well-twisted sheep's wool, with which, frequently hurling, they broke the phalanxes of the Trojans. At that time, indeed, these, the Ajaces in the van, with their variously wrought armour, fought against the Trojans and brazen-armed Hector, whilst the Locrians, shooting from the rear, lay concealed. Nor were the Trojans any longer mindful of combat, for the arrows put them in confusion. Then surely would the Trojans have retreated with loss from the ships and tents to lofty Ilium, had not Polydamas, standing near, addressed bold Hector. "Hector, thou art impossible to be persuaded by advice, because indeed a god hath given thee, above others, warlike deeds. For this reason dost thou also desire to be more skilled than others in counsel? But by no means canst thou thyself obtain all things at once. To one indeed hath the deity given warlike deeds, to another dancing, and to another the harp and singing. To another again, far-sounding Jove implants a prudent mind in his bosom, of which many men reap the advantage, as prudence even preserves cities, and he himself, who possesses it, especially knows its value. Yet will I speak as appears to me best, because the encircling host of war burns round thee on all sides, and the magnanimous Trojans, since they have crossed the walls, some indeed stand apart with their arms, and others fight, but the fewer against the greater number, scattered amongst the ships. But retiring back, summon hither all the chiefs, and then we can better discuss the whole plan, whether we shall enter upon the many-benched ships, if indeed the deity will give us victory, or depart uninjured from the barks, because of a truth I fear lest the Greeks repay their debt of yesterday, since a man insatiate in war still remains at the ships, who I conceive will no longer abstain entirely from battle." Thus spoke Polydamas, but the faultless advice pleased Hector, and immediately he leaped with his armour from the chariot to the ground, and addressing him spoke winged words. "Polydamas, do thou retain here all the bravest, whilst I will come back again immediately after I have given proper orders to the troops." He said, and shouting, he rushed on, like unto a snowy mountain, and flew through the Trojans and the allies. But they all crowded round valour-loving Polydamas, the son of Panthus, as soon as they heard the voice of Hector. He, however, ranged through the foremost combatants, seeking if he could anywhere find Deiphobus, the mighty king of Helenus, and Adamas, the son of Asias, and Asius, the son of Hyrtacus. Some he found no longer quite unhurt, nor yet destroyed, whilst others again lay at the sterns of the ships of the Greeks, having lost their lives by the hands of the Greeks. And others were stricken or wounded within the wall. But he quickly found noble Alexander, the husband of fair-haired Helen, on the left of the lamentable battle, cheering of his companions, and encouraging them to fight. And standing near, he addressed him with reproachful words. "Accursed Paris,
fine only in person, woman-mad, seducer, where are Deiphobus and the might of King Helenus, and Adamas, the son of Asias, and Asius, the son of Hyrtacus? Where also is Othryoneus? Now lofty Ilium all perishes from its summit, now is its final destruction certain. But him godlike Alexander in turn addressed, Hector, since it is thy intention to find fault with me when innocent, at some other time perhaps I may be more neglectful of the fight, but not now, since neither did my mother bear me altogether unwarlike. For from the time when thou didst stir up the battle of thy companions at the ships, from that time, remaining here, have we engaged incessantly with the Greeks, and those comrades are dead, for whom thou inquirest. Deiphobus and the might of King Helenus alone have withdrawn, both wounded in the hand with long spears, but the son of Saturn hath warded off death from them. But now lead on, wheresoever thy heart and soul urge thee, and we will follow with determined minds, nor do I think that thou wilt be at all in want of valour, as much strength as in us. It is not possible even for one, although keenly desirous, to fight beyond his strength. So saying, the hero persuaded the mind of his brother, and they hastened to advance towards that place where especially was the battle and contest. Round Cebriones and excellent Polydamas, Phalces and Orthaeus, and godlike Polyphotes, and Palmus, and Ascanius, and Morus, the sons of Hippotion, who the day before had come as a relief guard from fertile Ascania, and Jove then urged them to fight, but they marched like unto the blast of boisterous winds, which rushes down to the plain, urged by the thunder of Father Jove, and with a dreadful tumult is mingled with the ocean, and in it rise many boiling billows of the much resounding sea, swollen, whitened with foam, first indeed some, and then others following. So the Trojans, first indeed some in battle array, and then others, glittering in brass, followed along with their leaders. But Hector, the son of Priam, equal to manslaughtering Mars, led the van, and held before him his shield, equal on all sides, thick with skins, and much brass was laid over it. And round his temples his gleaming helmet was shaken. Stepping forward, he tried the phalanxes around on every side, if perchance they would give way to him, advancing under cover of his shield. Yet he disturbed not the courage of the Greeks in their breasts. But Ajax, far-striding, first challenged him. O noble sir, draw nearer. Why dost thou thus frighten the Greeks? We Greeks are by no means unskilful in battle, although we are subdued by the evil scourge of Jove. Thy soul, forsooth, hopes, I suppose, to plunder the ships, but we also have hands ready to repulse thee immediately. Assuredly long before shall thy well-inhabited city be taken and destroyed by our hands. But to thee thyself I say, the time draws near when flying thou shalt pray to Father Jove and the other immortals, that thy fair-maned steeds, which shall bear thee to the city, raising dust over the plain, may become swifter than hawks. Whilst he was thus speaking, a bird flew over him on the right, a lofty flying eagle, upon which the people of the Greeks shouted, encouraged by the omen. But illustrious Hector replied, O babbling and vain-boasting Ajax, what hast thou said? Would that I were as sure of becoming forever the child of aegis-bearing Jove, that the venerable Juno had borne me, and that I were honoured as Minerva and Apollo are honoured, as that this day now certainly brings destruction upon all the Greeks, and among others thou shalt be slain, if thou wilt dare to abide my long spear, which shall tear for thee thy dainty person, and thou shalt satiate the dogs and birds of the Trojans with thy fat and flesh, falling at the ships of the Greeks. Thus then, having spoken, he led on, and they followed along with him with a mighty shout, and the troops likewise shouted in the rear. The Greeks on the other side raised a shout, nor were they forgetful of their valour, but they awaited the bravest of the Trojans assaulting. But the clamour of both reached to the ether, and the shining splendour of Jove. End of Book the 13th. Section 14, Book the 14th. Argument. Agamemnon and the other wounded chiefs visit the battle with Nestor. Juno, having borrowed the cestus of Venus, first obtains the assistance of sleep, and then hastens to Ida, to inveigle Jove. She prevails, Jove sleeps, and Neptune seizes the opportunity to aid the Trojans. But the shouting did not entirely escape the notice of Nestor, although drinking, but he addressed winged words to the son of Aesculapius. Consider, noble Machaon, how well these things will be. Greater certainly grows the shouting of the blooming youths at the ships. But sitting here at present, drink indeed the dark wine, until fair-haired Hecamede has warmed the tepid baths, and washed away the bloody gore, whilst I, going with speed to a watch-tower, will gain information. So saying, he took the well-made shield of his own son, horse-breaking Thrasymedes, which was lying in the tent, all shining with brass, for he had the shield of his sire, and seized a strong spear, pointed with sharp brass, and stood without the tent, and soon beheld an unseemly deed. These the Greeks in confusion, and those the haughty Trojans routing them in the rear, but the wall of the Greeks had fallen. And as when the vast deep blackens with a noiseless wave, foreboding with no effect the rapid courses of the shrill blasts, nor yet is it rolled, forwards or backwards, before some decisive blast comes down from Jove, so meditated the old man, distracted in his mind, between two opinions, whether he should go amongst the throng of fleet-horsed Greeks, or to Agamemnon the son of Atreus, shepherd of the people. But to him thus reflecting, it appeared better to go in quest of the son of Atreus. Meanwhile they kept slaughtering each other, contending, and the solid brass around their bodies rang, as they were stricken with the swords and two-edged spears. But the Jove-cherished kings, coming up from the vessels, met Nestor, as many as had been wounded with the brass, Tydides, and Ulysses, and Agamemnon the son of Atreus. Their ships indeed were drawn up upon the shore of the hoary deep, very far away from the battle, for they had drawn the first as far as the plain, and had built a wall at their sterns. For broad as it was, the shore was by no means able to contain their vessels, and the people were crowded. Wherefore they drew them up in rows one behind the other, and filled the wide mouth of the whole shore, as much as a promontories enclosed. There then were they walking together, leaning upon the spear, in order to behold the tumult and the battle, and the heart in their bosoms was grieved. But aged Nestor met them, and terrified the souls in the breasts of the Greeks, whom first King Agamemnon addressing said, O Nelean Nestor, great glory of the Greeks, why, leaving the man-destroying battle, comest thou hither? Truly I fear lest impetuous Hector make good his speech, as once he threatened, haranguing among the Trojans, that he would not return to Ilium from the ships, before that he had burned the ships with fire, and slain us also. Thus indeed he harangued, and now are all things fulfilling. Ye gods, surely the other well-grieved Greeks, as well as Achilles, store up wrath against me in their minds, nor are they willing to fight at the sterns of the ships. But him the Gerenian knight Nestor then answered, Assuredly these things are in active accomplishment, nor could even lofty thundering Jove himself contrive them otherwise. For the wall in which we trusted that it would be an impregnable defence to the ships and to ourselves has now fallen, but they are sustaining an obstinate contest at the swift ships. Nor couldst thou any longer distinguish, though examining particularly, on which side the Greeks confounded or routed. So promiscuously are they slain, whilst the shout reaches heaven. Let us, however, deliberate how these things will be, if counsel avail anything. Although I advise not that we enter the battle, for it is by no means proper that a wounded man should fight. But him then answered Agamemnon, king of men, Nestor, since they are combating at the sterns of the ships, and the constructed rampart avails not, nor the ditch, at which the Greeks suffered much, and hoped in their minds that it would be an impregnable defence to the ships and to themselves, surely it will be agreeable to all-powerful Jove that the Greeks perish there, inglorious, far away from Argos. For I was conscious when he unwillingly gave assistance to the Greeks, and I know now that he honours those, the Trojans, equally with the happy gods, but hath fettered our courage and our hands. But come, let us all obey, as I shall advise. Let us draw down the ships, as many as are drawn up first near the sea, and launch them all into the vast ocean. Let us moor them at the anchor in the deep, till mortal deceiving night arrive, if even then the Trojans may abstain from battle, and then we may perhaps draw down all the vessels. For there is no disgrace in flying from evil, not even during the night. It is better for a flying man to escape from evil than to be taken. But him sternly regarding, wise Ulysses then addressed, Son of Atreus, what speech hath escaped thy lips? Lost man! Thou shouldst command some worthless army, and not rule over us, to whom Jove hath granted, from youth even unto old age, to accomplish toilsome wars, until we each of us shall perish. Dost thou then desire thus to leave wide-wayed Troy, on account of which we have endured so many woes? Be silent, lest some other of the Greeks hear a speech which a man ought not to have brought through his mouth, whosoever understands in his mind how to speak prudent things, who is a sceptre-bearer, and whom so many people obey, as many as thou dost govern among the Greeks. For now do I reprobate thy judgment in what thou hast said, who commandest us, whilst the war and battle are waged, to draw down the well-benched ships to the sea, in order that the wishes of the Trojans may be still better fulfilled, victorious though they be, and dire destruction fall upon us. For the Greeks will not maintain the fight whilst the ships are being dragged to the sea, but will look back and retire from the combat. Then will thy counsel be injurious, O leader of the people. But him Agamemnon, the king of men, then answered, Much, O Ulysses, hast thou touched me to the soul with thy severe reproof. Yet I commanded not the sons of the Greeks against their will to draw the well-benched ships down to the sea. But now would that there were one, either young or old, who would deliver an opinion better than this. It would be to my joy. But among them Diomede, valiant in the din of battle, also spoke, The man is near, we need not seek far. If indeed ye are willing to be persuaded, and do not find fault each through wrath, because I am by birth the youngest among you, for I boast that my race is from a noble sire, Tydeus, whom the heaped-up earth covers at Thebes. For to Portheus were born 3 distinguished sons, and they dwelt in Pleuron and lofty Calydon, Agrius and Malus. But the third was the knight Oeneus, the father of my father, who was conspicuous among them for valour. He indeed remained there, but my father as an exile dwelt at Argos, for so Jove willed, and the other gods. But he married one of the daughters of Adrastus, and he inhabited a mansion opulent in resources, and corn-bearing fields were his in abundance. And there were many rows of plants around him, numerous were his herds, and he surpassed the Greeks in the use of the spear. But these things ye ought to know, since it is a truth. Do not therefore dispute the opinion freely delivered, which I give advisedly, deeming that I am base by birth and unwarlike. Come then, let us go to battle, wounded as we are, from necessity. There then let us ourselves approach the combat out of the reach of weapons, lest any one receive wound upon wound. And encouraging others, we will urge them on, who hitherto gratifying their souls have stood apart, nor fought. Thus he spoke, and to him they all listened readily, and obeyed. Wherefore they hastened to advance, and the king of men Agamemnon led them. Nor did the illustrious Earth-shaker keep a negligent lookout, but he went amongst them like unto an aged man, and he caught the right hand of Agamemnon, the son of Atreus, and addressing him spoke winged words. Son of Atreus, now perchance the revengeful heart of Achilles rejoices in his breast, beholding the slaughter and rout of the Greeks, since there is no feeling in him, not even a little. May he, however, thus perish, and may a god cover him with disgrace. But with thee the blessed gods are not yet altogether enraged, but again the leaders and chiefs of the Trojans will perchance raise the dust upon the wide plain, and thou wilt behold them, flying towards the city from the ships and the tents. So saying, he shouted aloud, rushing over the plain, as loud as 9 or 10,000 men shout, beginning the contest of Mars. So loud a cry did King Neptune send forth from his breast, and he cast great resolution into every heart among the Greeks, to war and to fight incessantly. But golden-throned Juno, standing, looked down with her eyes from the summit of Olympus, and immediately recognized her own brother, who was also her brother-in-law, exerting himself through the glorious battle, and she rejoiced in her mind. She also beheld Jove sitting upon the highest top of many-rilled Ida, and he was hateful to her soul. Then the venerable large-eyed Juno next anxiously considered how she could beguile the mind of aegis-bearing Jove. And now this plan appeared best to her mind, to proceed to Ida, having well arrayed herself, if perchance he might desirous to lie beside her form in dalliance, so that she might pour upon his eyelids and vigilant mind careless and genial sleep. And she proceeded to her chamber, which Vulcan her dear son had made for her, and had fitted the thick doors to the lintels with a secret bolt, and this no other god could remove. There entering in, she closed the shining doors. First she washed all impurities from her lovely person, and anointed herself with rich oil, ambrosial and agreeable, which was odoriferous to her, and the perfume of which, when shaken in the brazen-floored mansion of Jove, reached even to earth and to heaven. With this having anointed her body, and having also combed her hair, with her hands she arranged her shining locks, beautiful, ambrosial, which flowed from her immortal head. Next she threw around her an ambrosial robe, which Minerva had wrought for her in needlework, and had embroidered much varied work upon it, and she fastened it upon her breast with golden clasps. Then she girded herself with a zone, adorned with 100 fringes, and in her well-perforated ears placed her triple-gemmed elaborate earrings, and much grace shone from her. From above she, divine of goddesses, covered herself with a veil, beautiful, newly wrought, and it was bright as the sun. And beneath her shining feet she fastened her beautiful sandals. But when she had arranged all her ornaments around her person, she proceeded straight from her chamber, and having called Venus apart from the other gods, addressed her in speech. Wilt thou now be at all obedient to me, dear child, in what I shall say? Or wilt thou refuse, enraged in thy mind on this account, because I aid the Greeks whilst thou aidest the Trojans? But her, Venus, the daughter of Jove, then answered, Juno, venerable goddess, daughter of mighty Saturn, declare whatsoever thou dost meditate, for my mind urges me to accomplish it, if indeed I can accomplish it, and if it be practicable. But her, the venerable Juno, meditating guile, addressed, Give now to me that loveliness and desire with which thou dost subdue all immortals and mortal men. For I go to visit the limits of the fertile earth, and Oceanus, the parent of the gods, and mother Tethys, who, receiving me from Rhea, nurtured and educated me with care in their abodes, when far-resounding Jove cast down Saturn beneath the earth and the fruitless sea. These I go to visit, and I will put an end to eternal quarrels, for already have they abstained for a length of time from the couch and embrace of each other, since anger fell upon their mind. But if, by persuading their hearts by my words, I should lead them back to the bed, to be united in love, then should I always be called by them beloved and revered. But her, laughter-loving Venus in turn addressed, It is not possible, nor becoming to refuse thy request, for thou reclinest in the arms of mightiest Jove. Take this, now place in thy bosom this variegated belt, in which all things are contained, and I think that thou wilt not return with thy object unaccomplished, whatsoever thou desirest in thy mind. Thus she spake, and the large-eyed, venerable Juno smiled, and smiling, then placed it in her bosom. But Venus, the daughter of Jove, departed to the palace, and Juno, hastening, quitted the summit of Olympus, and having passed over Pieria and fertile Emathia, she hastened over the snowy mountains of the equestrian Thrace, most lofty summits, nor did she touch the ground with her feet. From Athos she descended to the foaming deep, and came to Lemnos, the city of divine Thoas, where she met Sleep, the brother of Death, to whose hand she then clung, and spoke, and addressed him. O Sleep, king of all gods and all men, if ever indeed thou didst listen to my entreaty, now too be persuaded, and I will acknowledge gratitude to thee all my days. Close immediately in sleep for me the bright eyes of Jove under his eyelids, after I couch with him in love, and I will give thee as gifts a handsome golden throne, forever incorruptible, and my limping son Vulcan adorning it shall make it, and below thy feet he shall place a footstool, upon which thou mayest rest thy shining feet while feasting. But her, sweet Sleep answering addressed, Juno, venerable goddess, daughter of great Saturn, any other of the everlasting gods could I easily lull to sleep, and even the flowing of rapid ocean, who is the parent of all. But I could not approach Saturnian Jove, nor lull him to sleep, unless at least he himself command me. For once already at least has he terrified me by his threats, on that day when the magnanimous son of Jove, Hercules, sailed from Ilium, having sacked the city of the Trojans. Then I lulled the mind of aegis-bearing Jove, being poured gently around him, whilst thou wast planning evils in thy mind against the hero, rousing the blasts of bitter winds over the deep, and thou didst afterwards carry him away apart from all his friends to well-inhabited coasts. But he, when awakened, was enraged, hurling about the gods through his mansion, and me chiefly of all he sought, and would have cast me down, a lost one, from the ether into the deep, had not Night, vanquisher of gods and men, preserved me, to whom I came flying. So he restrained himself, angry as he was, for he dreaded lest he should do things which were disagreeable to swift Night. And now again dost thou urge me to perform this another dangerous deed. But him the venerable large-eyed Juno in turn answered, O Sleep, why thinkest thou these things within thy mind? Canst thou suppose that far-sounding Jove favours the Trojans, as he was enraged on account of Hercules his own son? But come, do this, and I will give thee one of the younger Graces to wed, and to be called thy spouse, Pasithea, whom thou fondly desirest day after day. Thus she spoke, but Sleep was delighted, and answering addressed her, Come now, swear to me by the inviolable water of the Styx, and touch with one hand the fertile earth, and with the other the marble sea, so that all the gods beneath around Saturn may be witnesses between us, that thou wilt surely give me one of the younger Graces, Pasithea, whom I will desire all my days.
Thus he spoke, nor did the white-armed goddess Juno disobey, but she swore as he desired, and named all gods who dwell under Tartarus, which are called Titans. When then she had sworn and performed her oath, they both proceeded, leaving the city of Lemnos and Imbrus, mantled in haze, quickly making their way. And they came to Ida of many rills, the mother of wild beasts, to Lectus, where first they quitted the sea. But they both advanced over the land, and the summit of the wood was shaken beneath their feet. There sleep on his part remained, before the eyes of Jove should perceive him, ascending a lofty fir, which then growing the highest upon Ida, sprung up through the air to the clouds. There he sat, thickly covered with the fir branches, like unto a shrill bird, which, living in the mountains, the gods call Chalcis, and men Cymindis. But Juno proceeded hastily to Gargarus, the summit of lofty Ida, and cloud-compelling Jove beheld her. But the instant he beheld her, that instant desire entirely shadowed around his august mind, just as when they first were united in love, retiring to the bed, without the knowledge of their dear parents. And he stood before her, and spoke, and addressed her. Wherefore, hastening from Olympus, Juno, comest thou hither? But thy horses and chariot are not near, which thou mayest ascend. But him the venerable Juno, meditating guiles, addressed. I go to visit the limits of the fertile earth, and Oceanus, the parent of the gods, and mother Tethys, who nurtured and trained me with care in their palaces. Them I go to see, and will take away their bitter quarrels. For already they abstain a long while from the couch, and embrace of each other, since anger has invaded their minds. But my steeds, which will bear me over dry and wet, stand near the base of Ida with many rills. Now, however, on thy account have I come hither from Olympus, lest perchance thou shouldst afterwards be angry with me, were I to depart in secret to the abode of deep-flowing Oceanus. But her cloud-collecting Jove answering addressed, Juno, thither thou canst go even by and by, but come now, let us reclining be delighted with love. For never at any time did the love of a goddess or a woman poured around the heart within thy breast so subdue me. Neither when I loved the wife of Ixion, who bore Pirithous, a counsellor equal to the gods, nor when I loved fair-ankled Danae, the daughter of Acrisius, who bore Perseus, the most illustrious of all men, nor when with that of the celebrated daughter of Phoenix, who bore me to Minos, and godlike Rhadamanthus, nor yet when I loved Semele, nor Alcmena in Thebes, who brought forth my valiant son Hercules. But Semele bore me, Bacchus, a joy to mortals, nor when I loved Ceres, the fair-haired queen, nor when glorious Latona, nor thyself, as I now love thee, and sweet desire seizes me. But him venerable Juno, meditating guiles, addressed, Most shameless son of Saturn, what word hast thou spoken? If now thou desire to recline in love upon the summit of Ida, where all places are exposed, how will it be if any of the immortal gods should perceive us sleeping, and going amongst all the gods disclose it? I, for my part, could never return to thy mansion, arising from the couch, for surely it would be unbecoming. But if in truth thou desirest it, and it be agreeable to thy soul, there is a chamber of thine which Vulcan, thy beloved son, formed for thee, and fitted its secure doors to its lintels. Thither let us repair, about to recline, since an embrace is indeed thy desire. But her cloud-collecting Jove answering addressed, Fear not, O Juno, that any of either gods or men shall behold this. Such a golden cloud will I spread around, that not even the sun may see us through it, although his eye is very keen to behold. Thus he spake, and the son of Saturn encircled his wife in his arms, and the divine earth produced fresh herbage under them, the dewy lotus, and the crocus, and the hyacinth close and soft, which elevated them from the earth. Upon this couch they reclined, and clothed themselves above with a beautiful cloud, and lucid dewdrops fell from it. Thus quietly slumbered the sire upon the summit of Gargarus, subdued by sleep and love, and held his spouse in his arms. But sweet sleep hastened to run to the ships of the Greeks, that he might deliver a message to Neptune, the shaker of the earth. And standing near, he addressed to him winged words. Now, Neptune, heartily give aid to the Greeks, and bestow glory upon them, at least for a little while, whilst yet Jove sleeps, since I have enveloped him in a veil of soft slumber, and Juno hath deceived him, that he might sleep in love. So saying, he indeed departed to the illustrious tribes of men, but he still more impelled Neptune to assist the Greeks, and immediately springing forward far into the van, he exhorted them, O Greeks, yet again do we yield the victory to Hector, the son of Priam, that he may seize the ships and bear away glory? For so indeed he supposes and boasts, because Achilles remains at the hollow ships, enraged at heart. However, there would not be a great need of him if the rest of us were incited to assist one another. But come, let us all obey as I shall advise. Let us, clad with shields, as many as are best and greatest in the army, who are covered as to our heads with glittering helmets, and hold the longest spears in our hands, advance, and I will lead the way. Nor do I think that Hector, the son of Priam, will await us, though very eager. Whatsoever man also is obstinate in the fight, and bears but a small shield upon his shoulder, let him give it to an inferior man, and let him clothe himself in a larger shield. Thus he spoke, but they listened to him readily, and obeyed. The kings themselves, Tydides, Ulysses, and Agamemnon, son of Atreus, marshalled the troops, wounded as they were, and going about them all, exchanged their martial arms. The brave soldier put on the good armour, and the worse they gave to the inferior man. But when they had girded the splendid brass around their bodies, they began to advance, and earth-shaking Neptune led them on, grasping in his firm hand a dreadful tapering sword, like unto a thunderbolt, with which sword it is not possible to engage in destructive battle, for the fear of it restrains men. On the other side again, illustrious Hector drew up the Trojans. Then truly azure-haired Neptune and illustrious Hector drew forth the severest struggle of war, the one indeed aiding the Trojans, and the other the Greeks. But the sea was dashed up to the tents and ships of the Greeks, and they engaged with a mighty shout. Not so loudly does the billow of the ocean roar against the main land, when driven from the deep by the rough blast of Boreas, nor so great is the crackling of blazing fire in the glens of a mountain, when it is raised aloft to consume the wood, nor so loud howls the wind amidst the high-foliaged oaks, which in particular loudly roars in its wrath, as was the cry of the Trojans and Greeks shouting dreadfully when they rushed one upon the other. At Ajax illustrious Hector first took aim with his spear, as he was turned right against him, nor did he miss. He struck him where the two belts were crossed upon his breast, both that of the shield and that of the silver-studded sword, for these protected the tender skin. But Hector was enraged because his swift weapon had fled from his hand in vain, and he retired back into the crowd of his companions, shunning death. At him then retiring, mighty Telamonian Ajax threw with a stone, for stones in great numbers were rolled about among the feet of the combatants, props for the fleet barks. Lifting up one of these, he struck him on the breast, above the orb of the shield, near the neck, and throwing, he twirled it like a top, and the stone rolled round on all sides, as when, beneath a violent stroke from Father Jove, an oak falls uprooted, and a terrible smell of sulphur arises from it, but confidence no longer possesses the man, whosoever being near beholds it, because the thunderbolt of mighty Jove is terrible. So rapidly upon the ground fell the might of Hector in the dust, and he dropped his spear from his hand. His shield and helmet followed above him, and his armour, variegated with brass, rang upon him. Then the sons of the Greeks, loudly shouting, rushed in, hoping to draw him off, and they hurled numerous javelins. But no one was able either to strike from a distance, or to smite close at hand the shepherd of the people, or the bravest of the warriors, Polydamas, Æneas, and noble Agenor, Sarpedon, leader of Lycians, and illustrious Glaucus, first threw themselves round him. And no one of the rest neglected him, but they held their well-orbed shields before him. But his companions, upraising him in their hands, bore him out of the conflict, till they reached his fleet horses, which stood for him in rear of the combat and the war, holding both the charioteer and the variegated car, which then carried him towards the city, groaning heavily. But when now they came to the ford of the rapid-flowing torrent of eddying Xanthus, whom immortal Jove begat, where they removed him from his car to the ground, and poured water over him, but he breathed again, and looked up with his eyes, and sitting upon his knees disgorged black blood. Again he fell back upon the ground, and dark night overshadowed his eyes, for the blow still subdued his spirits. But when the Greeks saw Hector going apart, they pressed the more on the Trojans, and were mindful of contest. Then swift Oilean Ajax before others, leaping forward with his fir-tree spear, wounded Satnius, son of Enops, whom a Naiad, the fairest nymph, bore to Enops, when keeping his flocks by the bank of Satnio. Him the spear-renowned son of Oileus, drawing near, wounded in the flank. But he fell supine, and round him the Trojans and Greeks engaged in a valiant battle. But to him spear-brandishing Polydamas, son of Panthus, came as an avenger, and smote Prothoenor, son of Arelochus, upon the right shoulder. The tough spear passed on through his shoulder, but falling in the dust, he grasped the earth with his hand. And Polydamas boasted mightily over him, shouting aloud, "I do not think, indeed, that the weapon hath fled vainly from the sturdy hand of the magnanimous son of Panthus, but some one of the Greeks has received it in his body. And I think that he, leaning upon it, will descend to the mansion of Pluto." Thus he spoke. But grief arose among the Greeks at his boasting, and particularly agitated the mind of warlike Ajax, the son of Telamon, for he had fallen very near him. And he immediately hurled with his shining spear at him departing. Polydamas himself indeed avoided black fate, springing off obliquely, but Archilochus, son of Antenor, received the blow, for to him the gods had doomed destruction. Him then he struck upon the last vertebra, in the joining of the head and neck. And he disjoined both tendons, but the head, the mouth, and the nostrils of him falling, met the ground much sooner than his legs and knees. Then Ajax in turn cried out to blameless Polydamas, "Reflect, O Polydamas, and tell me the truth. Is not this man worthy to be slain in exchange of Prothoenor? He appears not to me indeed a coward, nor sprung from cowards, but to be the brother or the son of horse-breaking Antenor, for he seems most like him as to his race." Thus he spoke, well knowing him, but grief possessed the minds of the Trojans. Then Acamas, stalking round his brother, wounded with his spear Promachus, the Boeotian, whilst he was dragging him off by the feet. But over him Acamas greatly boasted, calling aloud, "Ye Argive archers, insatiable in threats, assuredly not to us alone will toil and sorrow accrue, but thus thou wilt at some time be slain. Consider how your Promachus sleeps, subdued by my spear, that a requital for my brother might not be long unpaid. Therefore should a man wish a brother to be left in his family, as an avenger of his death." Thus he spoke, but grief arose among the Greeks as he boasted, and he particularly agitated the mind of warlike Peneleus. Accordingly he rushed upon Acamas, who awaited not the charge of King Peneleus, but he wounded Ilioneus, son of Phorbas, rich in flocks, whom Mercury loved most of all the Trojans, and had presented with possessions, and to whom his mother bore Ilioneus alone. Him then he wounded below the brow, in the socket of the eye, and he forced out the pupil. But the spear went forward through the eye and through the back of the head, and he sat down, stretching out both his hands. But Peneleus, drawing his sharp sword, smote him upon the middle of the neck, and lopped off his head with his helmet to the ground, and the strong spear still remained in his eye. But Peneleus, holding it up like a poppy, shouted to the Trojans, and boasting spoke thus: "Tell for me, ye Trojans, the beloved father and mother of illustrious Ilioneus, that they may lament him in their halls. For neither shall the wife of Promachus, the son of Elegenor, present herself with joy to her dear husband coming back, when we, sons of the Greeks, return from Troy with our ships." Thus he spoke, but pale fear seized upon them all, and each gazed about, seeking where he might escape utter destruction. "Tell me now, ye Muses, possessing Olympian dwellings, which of the Greeks now first bore away gore-stained spoils of men, when the illustrious Earth-shaker turned the tide of battle? Telamonian Ajax then first wounded Hyrtius, son of Gyrtius, leader of the undaunted Mysians, and Antilochus spoiled Phalces and Murmurus. Meriones slew Morus and Hippotion, and Teucer slew Prothus and Periphoetius. But the son of Atreus next wounded upon the flank Hyperenor, the shepherd of the people, and the spear cutting its way drank his entrails, and his soul expelled, fled in haste through the inflicted wound, and darkness veiled his eyes. But Ajax, the swift son of Oileus, slew the most, because there was not one equal to him on foot, to follow the flying men, when Jove had excited flight amongst them. End of Book the 14th. Section 15, Book the 15th. Argument. Jove, awaking, and finding the Trojans routed, menaces Juno. He then sends Iris to desire Neptune to relinquish the battle, and Apollo to restore Hector to health. Armed with the Aegis, Apollo puts the Greeks to flight, who are pursued home to their fleet, while Telamonian Ajax slays 12 Trojans who were bringing fire to burn it. But after the fugitives had crossed both the rampart and the trench, and many were subdued by the hands of the Greeks, the rest were at length detained, waiting beside their chariots, pallid with fear, and terrified. But Jove arose on the summits of Ida from beside golden-throned Juno, and starting up he stood and beheld the Trojans and Greeks, those indeed in confusion, and the Greeks throwing them into confusion in the rear, and amongst them King Neptune. Hector he beheld lying upon the plain, and his companions sat round him, but he was afflicted with grievous difficulty of respiration, and devoid of his senses, vomiting blood, for it was not the weakest of the Greeks who had wounded him. The father of men and gods, seeing, pitied him, and sternly regarding Juno, severely addressed her. "O Juno, of evil art, impracticable, thy stratagem has made noble Hector cease from battle, and put his troops to flight. Indeed, I know not whether again thou mayest not be the first to reap the fruits of thy pernicious machinations, and I may chastise thee with stripes. Dost thou not remember when thou didst swing from on high, and I hung 2 anvils from thy feet, and bound a golden chain around thy hands, that could not be broken? And thou didst hang in the air and clouds, and the gods commiserated thee throughout lofty Olympus. But standing around they were not able to release thee. But whomsoever I caught, seizing, I hurled from the threshold of heaven, till he reached the earth hardly breathing. Nor even thus did my vehement anger, through grief for divine Hercules, leave me, whom thou prevailing upon the storms with the north wind didst send over the unfruitful sea, designing evils, and afterwards bore him out of his course to well-inhabited Cos. I liberated him indeed, and brought him back thence to steed-nourishing Argus, although having accomplished many toils. These things will I again recall to thy memory, that thou mayest cease from deceits, in order that thou mayest know whether the intercourse and a couch will avail thee, in which thou was mingled, coming apart from the gods, and having deceived me." Thus he spoke, but venerable, large-eyed Juno shuddered, and addressing him spoke winged words. "Be witness now, earth, and boundless heaven above, and the water of Styx gliding beneath, which is the greatest and most dreaded oath amongst the blessed gods, likewise thy sacred head and our own nuptial couch, by which I would not rashly swear at any time, that it is not by my instigation that earth-shaking Neptune harasses the Trojans and Hector, and aids the other side, but certainly his own mind incites and orders him, for beholding the Greeks oppressed at the ships, he took compassion on them, and even him would I advise to go there, where thou, O Cloud-collector, mayest command." Thus she spoke, but the father of men and gods smiled, and answering her, spoke winged words. "If indeed thou from henceforth, O venerable, large-eyed Juno, wouldst sit amongst the mortals, being of the same mind with me, then truly would Neptune, even although he very much wishes otherwise, immediately change his mind to the same point, to thy wish and mine. But if indeed thou speakest in sincerity, and truly, go now to the assemblies of the gods, and call Iris to come hither, and Apollo, renowned in archery, that she may go to the people of the brazen-mailed Greeks, and tell King Neptune, ceasing from battle, to repair to his own palaces. But let Phœbus Apollo excite Hector to battle, and breathe strength into him again, and make him forgetful of the pains which now afflict him in his mind. But let him again put the Greeks to flight, exciting unwarlike panic amongst them, and flying, let them fall back upon the many-benched ships of Achilles, the son of Peleus. Then shall he stimulate his companion Patroclus, whom illustrious Hector shall slay with his spear before Ilium, Patroclus having slain many other youths, and with them my son, noble Sarpedon. But noble Achilles shall slay Hector. From this time forward will I always continually effect for thee that there shall be a retreat of the Trojans from the ships, until the Greeks, by the counsel of Minerva, shall take lofty Ilium. However, I shall not abate my anger, nor will I here permit any of the immortals to assist the Greeks, before that the request of the son of Peleus be completed. As first I promised to him, and nodded assent with my head, on that day when the goddess Thetis touched my knees, beseeching me that I would honour Achilles, the destroyer of cities. Thus he spoke, nor did the white-armed goddess Juno disobey, but went down from the Idaean mountains to lofty Olympus, and as when the mind of a man flashes swiftly in thought, who having traversed over many a land, thinks within his prudent heart, I was here, I was there, and deliberates much, thus quickly hastening, up sprung venerable Juno. But she reached lofty Olympus, and came in upon the immortal gods, assembled in the house of Jove. But they beholding her, all rose up and welcomed her with their cups. The rest, however, she neglected, but received a goblet from fair-cheeked Themis, for she first running came to meet her, and addressing her, spoke winged words.
Why, O Juno, hast thou come hither, and art like unto one in consternation? Has then the son of Saturn, who is thy husband, greatly terrified thee? But her the white-armed goddess Juno then answered, Do not, O goddess Themis, ask me these things. Even thou thyself knowest how overbearing and cruel a spirit is his. But do thou preside over the equal feast, in the palaces of the gods, and thou shalt hear these things along with all the immortals, what evil deeds Jove denounces. Nor do I at all think that the mind will equally rejoice to all, neither to mortals nor to the gods, although some one even yet be feasting pleasantly. Thus having spoken, venerable Juno sat down, but the gods were grieved throughout the palace of Jove. But she laughed with her lips only, nor was her forehead above her dark brows exhilarated. And indignant, she spoke amongst them all. Senseless we, who are thus foolishly enraged with Father Jove! Of a truth we still desire to restrain him, approaching near, either by persuasion or by force, whilst he, sitting apart, does not regard nor is moved, for he says he is decidedly the most mighty in strength and power among the immortal gods. Wherefore endure whatever evil he may please to send upon each of you, for now already I think misfortune has been inflicted upon Mars, since his son has perished in the fight, the dearest of mortals, Ascalaphus, whom impetuous Mars calls his own. Thus she spake, but Mars smote his brawny thighs with his dropped hands, and sorrowing addressed them. Do not now blame me, ye who possess the Olympic mansions, repairing to the ships of the Greeks, to avenge the slaughter of my son, even although it should be my fate, smitten with the thunderbolt of Jove, to lie together with the dead bodies in blood and dust. Thus he spake, and he commanded Fear and Flight to yoke his steeds, but he himself girded on his shining armour. Then indeed some other greater and more grievous wrath and indignation had fallen upon the immortals from Jove, had not Minerva, greatly fearing for all the gods, leaped forth from the vestibule, and left the throne where she sat. From his head she snatched the helmet, and the shield from his shoulders, and taking the brazen spear out of his strong hand, she placed it upright, and rebuked impetuous Mars with these words. Infuriated one, infatuated in mind, thou art undone. Are thy ears indeed useless for hearing, and have thy sense and shame perished? Dost thou not hear what the white-armed goddess Juno says, and she has just now come from Olympian Jove? Dost thou thyself wish, having fulfilled many misfortunes, to return to Olympus very much grieved, and by compulsion, and also to create a great evil to all the rest? For he will immediately leave the Trojans and magnanimous Greeks, and will come against us about to disturb us in Olympus, and will seize us one after the other, whoever is culpable and who is not. Wherefore I exhort thee now to lay aside thy wrath on account of thy son, for already some one, even superior to him in strength and in hands, either is slain, or will be hereafter. For it would be a difficult task to liberate from death the race and offspring of all men. So saying, she seated impetuous Mars upon his throne. But Juno called Apollo outside the house, and Iris, who is the messenger among the immortal gods, and addressing them, spoke winged words. Jove orders you twain to repair with all haste to Ida, but when ye arrive, and look upon the countenance of Jove, do whatsoever he may urge and command. Then indeed, having thus spoken, venerable Juno retired, and sat down upon her throne. But they, hastening, flew, and arrived at Ida of many rills, the mother of wild beasts. They found the far-seeing son of Saturn sitting upon lofty Gargarus, and an odoriferous cloud encircled him around. But coming before cloud-compelling Jove, they stood, nor was he enraged in his mind, beholding them, because they quickly obeyed the commands of his dear wife. And first to Iris he addressed winged words. Haste, be gone, fleet Iris, tell all these things to King Neptune, nor be thou a false messenger. Order him, having ceased from the battle and the war, to repair to the assemblies of the gods, or to the vast sea. If, however, he will not obey my words, but shall despise them, let him then consider in his mind and soul, lest, how powerful he may be, he may not be able to withstand me coming against him. For I say that I am superior to him in strength, and elder in birth, but his heart fears riots to assert himself equal to me, whom even the others dread. Thus he spoke, nor was wind-footed swift Iris disobedient. But she ascended from the Idaean mountains to sacred Ilium, and as when snow drifts from the clouds or cold hail by the impulse of cloud-dispelling Boreas, so quickly swift Iris with eagerness flew along, and standing near illustrious Neptune, she addressed him. O azure-haired Earth-shaker, I have come hither, bringing a certain message to thee from aegis-bearing Jove. He has commanded thee, having ceased from the battle and the war, to repair either to the assemblies of the gods or to the vast sea. But if thou wilt not obey his words, but shalt despise them, he threatens that he will come hither himself to fight against thee, and advises thee to avoid his hands, because he asserts that he is greatly superior to thee in strength, and elder in birth. But thy heart does not fear to profess that thou art equal to him, whom even the others dread.
But her illustrious Neptune, greatly indignant, then addressed, Gods, powerful though he be, he surely has spoken proudly. If he will by force restrain me unwilling, who am of equal honour. For we are 3 brothers descended from Saturn, whom Rhea brought forth, Jupiter and I, and Pluto, governing the infernal regions, the 3rd. All things were divided into 3 parts, and each was allotted his dignity. I, in the first place, the lots being shaken, was allotted to inhabit forever the hoary sea, and Pluto next obtained the pitchy darkness. But Jove, in the 3rd place, had allotted to him the wide heaven in the air and in the clouds. Nevertheless the earth is still common property of all, and lofty Olympus. Wherefore I shall not live according to the will of Jove, but although being very powerful, let him remain quiet in his 3rd part, and let him by no means terrify me as a coward with his hands. For it would be better for him to insult with terrific language the daughters and sons whom he hath begotten, who will also through necessity attend to him, exhorting them. But him the fleet, wind-footed Iris then answered, O azure-haired Earth-shaker, shall I really thus bear back from thee to Jove this relentless and violent reply, or wilt thou change it at all? The minds of the prudent indeed are flexible. Thou knowest that the Furies are ever attendant on the elders. But her again, earth-shaking Neptune in turn addressed, Goddess Iris, very rightly hast thou delivered this opinion. Moreover, it is good when a messenger knows fitting things. But on this account severe indignation comes upon my heart and soul, because he wishes to chide with angry words me, equal to him by lot, and doomed to an equal destiny. Nevertheless at present, although being indignant, I will give way. But another thing will I tell thee, and I will threaten this from my soul, if indeed without me and prey-hunting Minerva, Juno, Mercury, and King Vulcan, he shall spare lofty Ilium, nor shall wish to destroy it, and give great glory to the Greeks, let him know this, that endless animosity shall arise between us. So saying, the Earth-shaker quitted the Grecian army, and proceeding, he plunged into the deep. But the Grecian heroes longed for him, and then cloud-compelling Jove addressed Apollo, Go now, dear Phœbus, to brazen-helmed Hector, for already hath earth-encircling Neptune departed to the vast sea, avoiding our dreadful anger. For otherwise the rest who are infernal gods, being around Saturn, would surely have heard our quarrel. This, however, is much better for me as well as for him, that he hath first yielded to my hands, accounting himself worthy of blame, because the matter would not have been accomplished without sweat. But do thou take the fringed aegis in thy hands, with which by violently shaking it, do thou greatly terrify the Grecian heroes. To thyself, however, O far-darting Apollo, let illustrious Hector be a care. So long then arouse his great might unto him, until the Greeks in flight reach the ships and the Hellespont. Thenceforth I shall myself deliberate in deed and word, how the Greeks also may revive from labour. Thus he spoke, nor did Apollo disobey his sire, but he descended from the Idaean mountains like unto a swift hawk, the dove-destroyer, the swiftest of birds. He found the son of warlike Priam, noble Hector, sitting, for he no longer lay on the ground, but had just collected his senses, recognizing his friends around him. But the panting and perspiration had ceased, since the will of aegis-bearing Jove had aroused him. Then far-darting Apollo, standing near, addressed him, Hector, son of Priam, why sittest thou apart from the rest, failing in strength? Has any grief invaded thee? But him then crest-tossing Hector languidly addressed, And who art thou, best of the gods, who inquirest face to face? Hast thou not heard that Ajax, brave in the din of battle, smote me with a stone upon the breast, and caused me to cease from impetuous valour, when slaying his companions at the sterns of the Grecian ships? And truly I thought that I should this day behold the dead, and the mansion of Pluto, since I was on the point of breathing out my dear life. But him far-darting King Apollo addressed in turn, Be of good courage now. So great an assistant has the son of Saturn sent forth from Ida to stand up and help thee, Phœbus Apollo, of the golden sword, who am accustomed to defend at the same time thyself and the lofty city. But come, encourage now thy numerous cavalry to drive their fleet steeds towards the hollow ships.
But I, going before, will level the whole way for the horses, and I will turn to flight the Grecian heroes." Thus speaking, he inspired great strength into the shepherd of the people. As when some stalled horse, fed on barley at the manger, having snapped his halter, runs over the plain, striking the earth with his feet, accustomed to bathe in the smooth-flowing river, exulting, he holds his head on high, and around his shoulders his mane is dishevelled, and trusting to his beauty, his knees easily bear him to the accustomed places and pasture of the mares. So Hector swiftly moved his feet and knees, encouraging the horsemen, after he had heard the voice of the god. But they, as dogs and rustic men rush against either a horned stag or wild goat, which however a lofty rock and shady forest protect, nor is it destined for them to catch it, but at their clamour a bushy-bearded lion appears in the way, and turns them all back, although ardently pursuing. Thus the Greeks hitherto indeed ever kept following in troops, striking with their swords and double-edged spears. But when they beheld Hector entering the ranks of heroes, they were troubled, and the courage of all fell at their feet. Then Thoas, the son of Andraemon, addressed them, by far the bravest of the Ætolians, skilled in the use of the javelin, and brave in the standing fight. Few also of the Greeks excelled him in the council when the youths contended in eloquence, who wisely counselling harangued them, and said, "O gods, surely I behold with mine eyes this mighty miracle, since Hector has thus risen again, having escaped death. Certainly the mind of each was in great hopes that he had died by the hands of Telamonian Ajax. But some one of the gods has again liberated and preserved Hector, who hath already relaxed the knees of many Greeks, as I think is about to occur now also, for not without far-sounding Jove does he stand in the van thus earnest. But come, let us all obey, as I shall desire. Let us order the multitude to retreat towards the ships. But let us, as many as boast ourselves to be the best in the army, take a stand, if indeed opposing we may at the outset interrupt him, upraising our spears, and I think that he, although raging, will dread in mind to enter the band of the Greeks." Thus he spoke, but all heard him attentively and obeyed. Those around the Ajaces and King Idomeneus, Teucer, Meriones, and Meges, equal to Mars, calling the chiefs together, marshalled their lines against Hector and the Trojans, whilst the multitude in the rear retreated to the ships of the Greeks. But the Trojans in close array pressed forward, and Hector taking long strides led the way. But before him walked Phœbus Apollo, clad as to his shoulders with a cloud, and he held the mighty dreadful fringed dazzling Aegis, which the artist Vulcan had given to Jove, to be borne along for the routing of men. Holding this in his hands he led on the people. But the Greeks remained in close array, and a shrill shout arose on both sides. Many arrows bounded from the strings, and many spears from gallant hands. Some were fixed in the bodies of warlike youths, but many half-way, before they had touched the fair body, stuck in the earth, longing to satiate themselves with flesh. As long as Phœbus Apollo held the Aegis unmoved in his hands, so long did the weapons reach both sides, and the people fell. But when, looking full in the faces of the swift-horsed Greeks, he shook it, and he himself besides shouted very loudly, then he checked the courage in their breasts, and they became forgetful of impetuous valour. But they, as when two wild beasts in the depth of the dark night disturb a drove of oxen or a great flock of sheep, coming suddenly upon them, the keeper not being present, so the enfeebled Greeks were routed, for amongst them Apollo sent terror, and gave glory to the Trojans and to Hector. Then indeed man slew man, when the battle gave way. Hector slew Stichius and Archesilaus, the one the leader of the brazen-mailed Boeotians, but the other the faithful companion of the magnanimous Menesius. But Æneas slew Medon and Iasus. Medon indeed was the illegitimate son of godlike Oïleus, and brother of Ajax, and he dwelt in Phylace, away from his fatherland, having slain a man, the brother of his stepmother Areopis, whom Oïleus had betrothed. Iasus, however, was appointed leader of the Athenians, and was called the son of Sphelus, the son of Bucolus. But Polydamas slew Mecistus and Polites Echius in the van, and noble Agenor slew Clonius. Pyrrhus also wounded Deicoeus in the extremity of the shoulder from behind, whilst he was flying amongst the foremost combatants, and drove the brass quite through. Whilst they were spoiling these of their armour, the Greeks in the meantime, falling into the dug trench and stakes, fled here and there, and from necessity entered within the rampart. But Hector, shouting aloud, exhorted the Trojans to rush upon the ships, and to let go the bloody spoils.
And whatever person shall perceive apart from the ships anywhere, there will I cause his death, nor indeed shall his male and female relatives make him when dead partaker of a funeral pile, but dogs shall tear him before our city." So saying, with the lash upon the shoulder, he drove on his horses against the ranks, cheering on the Trojans. But they all shouting along with him, directed their car-drawing steeds with a mighty clamour. But Phœbus Apollo in front of them, easily overthrowing the banks of the deep ditch with his feet, cast them into the middle, and bridged a causeway long and wide, as far as the cast of a spear reaches, when a man making trial of his strength hurls it. In that way they poured onward by troops, and Apollo went before them, holding the highly prized Ægis. But he overthrew the wall of the Greeks very easily, as when any boy does the sand from the shore, who, when amusing himself in childishness he has made playthings, again destroys them with his feet and hands. Thus, O archer Phœbus, didst thou destroy the great labour and toil of the Greeks, and didst excite flight amongst themselves. In this manner indeed remaining, they were penned up at the ships, animating each other, and raising up their hands to all the gods, they each loudly offered vows. But the guardian of the Greeks, Gerenian Nestor, most particularly prayed, stretching forth his hands to the starry heaven: "O Father Jove, if ever any one in fruitful Argos to thee, burning the fat thighs of either oxen or sheep, supplicated that he might return, and thou didst promise and assent, be mindful of these things, O Olympian, and avert the cruel day, nor thus permit the Greeks to be subdued by the Trojans." Thus he spoke, praying, but provident Jove loudly thundered, hearing the prayers of the Nelean old man. But the Trojans, when they understood the will of Ægis-bearing Jove, rushed the more against the Greeks, and were mindful of battle. And as a mighty wave of the wide-flowing ocean dashes over the sides of a ship, when the force of the wind impels it, for that most of all increases waves, so the Trojans with a mighty shout mounted over the wall, and having driven in their horses, they fought at the sterns, hand to hand, with two-edged spears, the one party from their chariots, but the other on high from their black ships, having ascended them with long poles which lay in their vessels, for fighting by sea, well glued, and clad on the tip with brass. But Patroclus, as long indeed as the Greeks and Trojans fought round the wall, without the swift ships, so long he sat in the tent of valour-loving Eurypylus, and delighted him with his disclosure, and to the severe wound he applied medicines, assuagers of dark pains. But when he perceived that the Trojans had burst within the walls, and moreover that the clamour and flight of the Greeks had risen, then indeed he groaned, and smote both his thighs with his downward bent hands, and lamenting spoke: "O Eurypylus, I cannot any longer remain here with thee, although needing much, for now has a mighty contest arisen. But let thy attendant entertain thee, and I will hasten to Achilles, that I may encourage him to fight. And who knows whether, with God's assistance persuading, I may move his soul? For the admonition of a companion is effectual." But him his feet then boring away, thus speaking. Meanwhile the Greeks firmly withstood the Trojans rushing on, nor were they able to repel them from the ships, although being fewer. Nor could the Trojans, breaking through the phalanxes of the Greeks, be mingled with the tents or ships. But as a plumb-line in the hands of a skilful shipwright, who knows well the whole art, by the precepts of Minerva, correctly adjusts the naval plank, so was the battle and war equally extended. Some indeed supported the conflict round one ship, and others round another. But Hector advanced against glorious Ajax. Thus these two undertook the task round one ship, nor were they able the one to drive the other away and burn the ship with fire, nor the one to repulse him, since a divinity had brought him near. Then illustrious Ajax smote upon the breast with his spear Caletor, son of Clytius, bearing fire against the ship. And falling he resounded, and the torch fell from his hand. But when Hector perceived with his eyes his cousin fallen in the dust before the black ship, he cheered on the Trojans and Lycians, loudly exclaiming: "Ye Trojans and Lycians, and close-fighting Dardanians, do not now retire from the fight in this narrow pass, but preserve the son of Clytius, lest the Greeks despoil him of his armour, having fallen in the contest at the ships." Thus having spoken, he took aim with his shining spear at Ajax, whom he missed. But he smote Lycophron, the son of Mastor, the servant of Ajax, a Cytherean, who dwelt with him, since he had killed a man amongst the celebrated Cythereans. He struck him on the head over the ear with the sharp brass, whilst he was standing near Ajax.
But he fell supine to the ground from the stern of the ship in the dust, and his limbs were relaxed. Then Ajax shuddered, and accosted his brother. "Dear Teucer, now is our faithful companion the son of Master, whom being domesticated in Cythera, we honoured equally with our beloved parents in our palaces, but him magnanimous Hector has slain. Where now are thy death-bearing arrows and bow, which Phoebus Apollo gave thee?" Thus he spoke, but he understood, and running he stood near him, holding in his hand his bent bow and arrow-bearing quiver, and very quickly he shot his arrows against the Trojans. He struck Clytus, the illustrious son of Pisenor, the companion of Polydamas, the renowned son of Panthus, holding the reins in his hands. He indeed was employed in guiding the horses, for he directed them there, where the most numerous phalanxes were thrown in confusion, gratifying Hector and the Trojans. But soon came evil upon him, which no one averted from him, although eager. For the bitter shaft fell upon his neck from behind, and he fell from the chariot whilst his horses started back, rattling the empty car. But the king Polydamas very quickly perceived it, and first came to meet his horses. Them he entrusted to Astinus, son of Proetion, and exhorted him much to keep the horses near him within sight. But he himself returning was mingled with the foremost combatants. Teucer, however, drew another arrow against brazen-armed Hector, and would have made him cease from battle at the ships of the Greeks, as striking him while bravely fighting, he had taken away his life. But it did not escape the prudent mind of Jove, who protected Hector, and deprived Teucer, the son of Telamon, of glory, and who Jove broke the well-twisted string in his blameless bow as he was drawing against Hector. But the brass-laden arrow was turned off in another direction, and the bow fell from his hand. Then Teucer shuddered, and addressed his brother. "Ye gods! A deity without doubt cuts short the plans of our battle, who has shaken the bow from my hand, and has snapped asunder the newly twisted string which I tied to it this morning, that it might sustain the shafts frequently bounding from it." But him the mighty Telamonian Ajax then answered, "O my friend, permit then thy bow and numerous arrows to lie aside, since a god has confounded them, envying the Greeks. But taking a long spear in thy hands, and a shield upon thy shoulder, fight against the Trojans, and encourage the other forces, nor let them take the well-benched ships without labour at least, although having subdued us, but let us be mindful of the fight." Thus he spoke, and he placed his bow within the tents. Then around his shoulders he hung a fourfold shield, and upon his brave head fixed a well-made helmet, crested with horsehair, and the plume nodded dreadfully from above. And he grasped a stout spear, tipped with sharp brass, and hastened to advance, and running very quickly stood beside Ajax. But when Hector perceived the arrows of Teucer frustrated, he encouraged the Trojans and Lycians, calling aloud, "Ye Trojans, Lycians, and close-fighting Dardanians, be men, my friends, and be mindful of impetuous valour at the hollow ships, for I have beheld with my eyes the arrows of their chief warrior rendered vain by Jove. Easily recognizable amongst men is the power of Jove, as well among those into whose hands he has delivered superior glory, as those whom he deteriorates and does not wish to defend, as now he diminishes the might of the Greeks and aids us. But fight in close array at the ships, and whichever of you, wounded or stricken, shall draw on his death and fate, let him die. It is not inglorious to him to die fighting for his country, but his wife shall be safe, and his children left behind him, his house and patrimony unimpaired, if indeed the Greeks depart with their ships to their dear fatherland." So saying, he kindled the strength and spirit of each, and Ajax again on the other side animated his companions. "Shame, O Argives! Now is the moment for us either to perish, or to be preserved and to repel destruction from the ships. Do ye expect that if crest-tossing Hector capture the ships, ye will reach on foot each his native land? Do ye not hear Hector, who now rages to fire the ships, inciting all his people? Nor indeed does he invite them to come to a dance, but to a battle. But for us there is no opinion or design better than this, to join in close fight our hands and strength. Better either to perish at once, or live, rather than uselessly to be wasted away for a length of time in dire contention at the ships, by inferior men." So saying, he aroused the strength and courage of each. Then Hector indeed slew Schedius, son of Perimedes, prince of the Phocians, and Ajax slew Laodamas, leader of the infantry, the illustrious son of Antenor. Polydamas slew Cyllenian Otus, the companion of the son of Phyleus, chief of the magnanimous Epeans. Meges rushed upon him, perceiving it, but Polydamas stooped obliquely, and he missed him,
For Apollo did not suffer the son of Panthus to be subdued among the foremost warriors. But he wounded Crœsmus in the middle of the breast with his spear, but falling he resounded, and he stripped the arms from his shoulders. In the meantime Dolops, the descendant of Lampus, well skilled in the spear, leaped upon him, he whom Lampus, son of Laomedon, the best of men, begat, skilled in impetuous fight, who then attacking him in close fight, struck the middle of Meges' shield with his spear. But the thick corslet defended him, which he wore, compact in his cavities. This Phyleus formerly brought from afar, from the river Selleus, for his host Euphates, king of men, had given it to him, to bear into the battle as a defence against the enemy, and which then warded off destruction from the body of his son. But Meges with his sharp spear smote the base of the highest cone of his brazen horse-haired helmet, and struck off his horse-haired crest, and the whole fell on the ground in the dust, lately shining with purple. Whilst the one Meges standing firm fought with the other, Dolops, and still expected victory. Meanwhile warlike Menelaus came as an assistant to Meges, and stood at his side with his spear, escaping notice, and wounded him from behind in the shoulder. But the spear, driven with violence, passed through his breast, proceeding farther, and he fell on his face. Both then rushed on, about to tear the brazen armour from his shoulders. But Hector strenuously exhorted all his relations, and rebuked the gallant Melanippus first, the son of Hicetaon. He till then had fed his curved-footed oxen at Percote, the enemy being yet at a distance. But when the equally plied barks of the Greeks had arrived, he came back to Troy, and was distinguished amongst the Trojans, and he dwelt near Priam, and he honoured him equally with his sons. But Hector rebuked him, and spoke, and addressed him. "Shall we be thus remiss, O Melanippus? Is not thy heart moved, thy kinsmen being slain? Dost thou not perceive how busy they are about the arms of Dolops? But follow, for it is no longer justifiable to fight at a distance with the Greeks, before that either we slay them, or that they tear lofty Ilium from its summit, and slay its citizens." So saying, he led on, and the godlike hero followed with him. But mighty Telamonian Ajax aroused the Greeks. "O my friends, be men, and set honour in your hearts, and have reverence for each other during the vehement conflicts. For more of those men who reverence each other are saved than slain. But of the fugitives neither glory arises nor any defence." Thus he spoke, but they too were eager to repel the enemy, and they fixed his advice in their mind, and enclosed the ships with a brazen fence. But Jove urged on the Trojans, and Menelaus, brave in the din of battle, incited Antilochus. "O Antilochus, no other of the Greeks is younger than thou, nor swifter of foot, nor strong as thou art to fight. Would that, attacking some hero of the Trojans, thou couldst wound him." So saying, he on his part withdrew again, and he aroused him. But Antilochus leaped forth from amongst the foremost warriors, and took aim with his shining spear, gazing around him. But the Trojans retired, the hero hurling. But he did not cast his weapon in vain, for he struck magnanimous Melanippus, the son of Hicetaon, in the breast, near the pap, advancing to the battle. And falling, he made a crash, and his arms rang upon him. But Antilochus sprang upon him as a dog that rushes on a wounded fawn, which the huntsman aiming at has wounded, leaping from its lair, and relaxed its limbs under it. Thus, O Melanippus, did warlike Antilochus spring on thee, about to despoil thee of thy armour. But he did not escape noble Hector, who came against him, running through the battle. But Antilochus did not await him, though being an expert warrior, but he fled, like unto a wild beast that has done some mischief, which having slain a dog or herdsman in charge of oxen, flies before a crowd of men is assembled. So fled the son of Nestor. But the Trojans and Hector, with great clamour, poured forth their deadly weapons. Yet when he reached a band of his own companions, being turned around, he stood. But the Trojans, like raw devouring lions, rushed upon the ships, and were fulfilling the commands of Jove, who ever kept exciting their great strength, and enervated the courage of the Greeks, and took away their glory, but encouraged those. For his mind wished to bestow glory on Hector, the son of Priam, that he might cast the dreadfully burning, indefatigable fire upon the crooked barks, and accomplish all the unseasonable prayer of Thetis. For this did provident Jove await, till he should behold with his eyes the flame of a burning vessel. For from that time he was about to make a retreat of the Trojans from the ships, and to afford glory to the Greeks. Designing these things, he aroused Hector, the son of Priam, against the hollow ships, although himself very eager. But he raged, as when Mars rages, brandishing his spear, or when a destructive fire rages in the mountains, in the thickets of a deep wood, and foam arose about his mouth, and his eyes flashed from beneath his grim eyebrows, and the helm was shaken awfully upon the temples of Hector, fighting. For Jove himself from the ether was an assistant to him, and honoured and glorified him alone amongst many men, because he was destined to be short-lived. For Pallas Minerva already impelled him towards the fatal day by the might of the son of Peleus, and he wished to break the ranks of heroes, trying them wheresoever he beheld the greatest crowd and the best arms. But not thus was he able to break through them, although very eager. For they, compact in squares, sustained his attack, as a lofty huge cliff being near the hoary deep, which abides the impetuous inroads of the shrill winds, and the swollen billows which are dashed against it. Thus the Greeks firmly awaited the Trojans, nor fled. But he, gleaming with fire on all sides, rushed upon the crowd, and fell upon them, as when an impetuous wave, wind-nurtured from the clouds, dashes against a swift ship, and the ship is wholly enveloped with the spray, and a dreadful blast of wind roars within the sail, but the sailors tremble in mind, fearing, because they are borne but a little way from death. Thus was the mind of the Greeks divided in their breasts. He, however, like a destructive lion coming upon oxen, which feed in myriads in the moist ground of a spacious marsh, and amongst them a keeper not very skilful in fighting with a wild beast, for the slaughter of a crooked-horned ox. He indeed always accompanies the foremost or hindmost cattle, whilst the lion, springing into the midst, devours an ox, and all the rest fly in terror. Thus then were the Greeks wondrously put to flight by Hector and father Jove. But Hector slew only Mycenaean Periphetes, the dear son of Copreus, who went with a messenger of King Eurystheus to mighty Hercules. From this far inferior father sprung a son superior in all kinds of accomplishments, as well in the race as in the combat, and who in prudence was among the first of the Mycenaeans, who at that time gave into the hands of Hector superior glory. For, turning backwards, he trod upon the rim of his shield which he bore, a fence against javelins, which reached to his feet. By this incommoded, he fell upon his back, and the helmet terribly sounded round the temples of him fallen. But Hector quickly perceived, and running stood near him, and fixed his spear in his breast, and slew him near his beloved companions. Nor indeed were they able, although greed for their comrade, to avail him, for they themselves greatly feared noble Hector. But they retreated within the line of their ships, and the extreme ships enclosed them, which were first drawn up, and the others were poured in. The Argives therefore from necessity retreated from the foremost vessels, and remained there at their tents in close array, and were not dispersed through the camp, for shame and fear restrained them. And they unceasingly exhorted one another with shouting. More particularly did Gerenian Nestor, the guardian of the Greeks, adjure them by their parents, earnestly supplicating each man, "O my friends, be men, and place a sense of reverence of other men in your minds. Call to memory each of you your children, wives, property, and parents, as well he to whom they survive as he to whom they are dead. For by those not present I here supplicate you to stand bravely, nor be ye turned to flight." So saying, he aroused the might and spirit of each. But for them Minerva removed the heaven-sent cloud of darkness from their eyes, and abundant light arose to them on both sides, both towards the ships and towards the equally destructive battle. Then they observed Hector brave in the din of battle, and his companions as well whatever of them stood behind, and did not fight as those who fought the battle at the swift ships. Nor was it longer pleasing to the mind of great-hearted Ajax to stand there where the other sons of the Greeks stood together. But he went about upon the decks of the vessels, taking long strides, and wielding in his hands a great sea-fighting pole, studded with iron nails, 22 cubits long. And as when a man well skilled in vaulting upon steeds, who, after he has selected 4 horses, out of a greater number, driving them from the plain, urges them towards a mighty city, along the public way, and him many men and women behold with admiration, but he, always leaping up firmly and safely, changes alternately from one to the other, whilst they are flying along, so went Ajax along many decks of swift ships, shouting loudly, and his voice reached to the sky. And always terribly shouting, he ordered the Greeks to defend their ships and tents. Nor indeed did Hector remain among the crowd of well-corsleted Trojans. But as a tawny eagle pounces upon a flock of winged birds, feeding on a river's bank, either geese or cranes or long-necked swans,
So did Hector direct his course towards an azured proud vessel, rushing against it. But Jove with a very mighty hand impelled him from behind, and animated his forces along with him. Again was a sharp contest waged at the ships. You would have said that unwearied and indefatigable they met each other in battle, so furiously they fought. And to them fighting this was the opinion. The Greeks indeed thought that they could not escape from destruction, but must perish. But the souls of each within his breast, to the Trojans, hoped to burn the ships, and slay the Grecian heroes. They, thinking these things, opposed one another. But Hector seized the stern of a sea-traversing bark, beautiful, swift, which had carried Protesilaus to Troy, but did not bear him back again to his fatherland. Round his ship the Greeks and Trojans were now slaying one another in close combat, nor did they indeed at a distance await the attacks of arrows and of javelins, but standing near, having one mind, they fought with sharp battle-axes and hatchets, with large swords and two-edged spears, and many fair swords, black-hilted, with massive handles, fell to the ground, some indeed from the hands, and others from the shoulders of the contending heroes, and the dark earth streamed with gore. But Hector, after he had seized the vessel by the stern, did not let go, holding the furthest edge with his hands, and he cheered on the Trojans. "Bring fire, and at the same time do yourselves together excite the battle. Now hath Jove vouchsafed us a day worth all, to take the ships, which coming hither against the will of the gods, brought many evils upon us through the cowardice of our elders, who kept me back when desirous myself to fight at the sterns of the ships, and restrained the people. But if indeed far-sounding Jove then injured our minds, he now impels and orders us." Thus he spoke, but they rushed the more against the Greeks. Even Ajax no longer sustained them, for he was overwhelmed with many darts, but thinking he should fall, retired back a short space to the 7-feet bench, and deserted the deck of his equal ship. There he stood watching, and with his spear continually repulsed the Trojans from the ships, whoever might bring the indefatigable fire, and always shouting dreadfully, he animated the Greeks. "O my friends, Grecian heroes, servants of Mars, be men, my friends, and be mindful of impetuous strength. Whether do we think that we have any assistance in the rear, or any stronger rampart which may avert destruction from the men? Indeed, there is not any other city near, fortified with towers, where we may be defended, having a reinforcing army. But bordering on the sea, we sit on the plain of the well-armed Trojans, far away from our native land. Therefore safety is in our exertions, not in remission of battle." He said, and furious, charged with his sharp spear whoever of the Trojans was borne towards the hollow ships with burning fire, for the sake of Hector who incited them. Him Ajax wounded, receiving him with his long spear, and he slew 12 in close fight before the ships. End of Book the 15th.